Stop, Friendly Fire. Chapter 26 to 27. Chapter 26. New Element. The Bursting Thunder skill has become LV10 and has evolved to the high rank level. Strength and magic have increased by 30. The powerful lightning can now draw upon the energy of the heavens. The Intermediate Combat Sense skill has become LV9. Agility has increased by 10. You will have a foggy idea of what your opponent will do next. You have learned the active skill, LV1 Lightning Shadow. He not only learned how to further progress as a warrior who used lightning, but also gained a new skill he could potentially fuse, and had an experience that was especially profitable. Yet, Shin Woo stared blankly, as though he had left his soul behind. Jin and Kratia quietly examined Shin Woo. What could have happened for him to be like that? I wonder, maybe he got a lot less stats than he'd expected from the bone? However, Shin Woo didn't hear the two's voices. He couldn't forget the last thing Sagald had said. Redidane? He definitely said Redidane. There was no way he'd heard wrong. Moreover, the memory of the experience was still fresh, and he could play back the memory if he wanted. He was sure. Sagald had said, Redidane. Wait, now that I think about it, Redidane would react whenever I talked about Sagald. At the time, Shin Woo had responded to her as naturally as possible, but he inwardly thought it was strange. Because Redidane didn't really react when the other 12 generals were mentioned. Thus, he had hypothesized that Redidane had already met Sagald once before. If that's the case, then is she his descendant? She's probably not his daughter, so maybe his granddaughter? When he'd come to the Underground Empire, he had definitely heard God say this in passing. Before she had summoned heroes from other worlds, she had turned her world's people into heroes. They all failed, but she didn't say that they had all died. But to think a citizen of the Empire would be included. Not only that, but a citizen of the Empire who wasn't affected by the curse. It's not impossible, right? She might have been born in a dungeon. So long as she operated as a hero, there would be no problem for him, regardless of whether Sarah von Redidane was a citizen of the Empire, lived above ground, or just lived in this world. He was a bit curious if the other heroes knew about this, but anyone would be able to figure out the truth if they knew Sagald's family name, and it wasn't even really a huge secret either. If I get the chance, I'll ask plain. But Shin Woo realized that he didn't really need to go out of his way to ask plain. By defeating the Lightning Shadow General, he gained 10 permits to God's secret shop. Defeating a general greatly contributed to God's goal of purifying the Empire, so it seemed as though God gave those contributing heroes the chance to meet her as a reward. If that's the case, then asking God would give him the most clear answer. All right, strike the iron while it's hot. What, there's still more we have to do? Nope, we're finished. It's been a while, so let's go meet God. Why don't you come too, Kratia? Jin looked uneasy, while Kratia briefly looked like she had no idea what was going on. She ruminated over the message right away, and nodded her head. Now that I think about it, I remember you, Shin Woo, talking about that. You don't need to be afraid. All you need to do is badger her for ability or an item. All right, I've changed my mind a little. Kratia still didn't like the idea of God affecting her abilities, but the conversation changed if God could give her a new artifact. Kratia, who wanted a new ability for her artifact, nodded her head at his words, and ultimately, entered God's garden. Then, shall we go too? Do we really have to? You never know, we might get better abilities. Plus, I have something personal I want to ask God. But if you really don't want to go, no, I'll go. Jin sighed quietly, nodded as if he had resolved himself, and stood beside him. Shin Woo had no idea what he had been thinking about, but thought it wasn't strange that Jin had his own problems to think about, and used the permit to God's garden. The party is entering God's garden through the use of the permit. When he softly closed his eyes and reopened them, he was transported to a beautiful garden that he'd been to once before. Perhaps because he completely accepted himself last time, he didn't appear as a human, but as a level 6 powered elemental bone joker. Of course, Jin wasn't anywhere nearby. Good job. He felt someone touch him. Shin Woo felt an aggressively warm and soft feeling spread over his body, and the sweet aroma made it so he momentarily couldn't get a hold of himself, but was soon able to calm down through invisible heart. The situation was quite clear. God was hugging him. To think she could agitate him, an undead, she wasn't a god for nothing. One who goes beyond the norm, an individual who goes against logic. Shin Woo was unnerved by that aggressive charm. Please get off me. To think you'd beat one of the 12 generals. It's been so long since that's happened. I said get off me. God was still excited and didn't let go, but soon, Shin Woo forcefully pushed her away. She laughed, patted his back, and stepped back. Try to understand. I like to express my happiness as well. It's a relief that you feel so happy. To be honest, Shin Woo had questioned God's intent of wanting to purify the empire before, but seeing her current attitude, he realized that her intent wasn't a lie after all. He really couldn't figure her out. Maybe she was just psychotic. You probably can't understand me, huh? Yes. Shin Woo replied honestly. God smiled bitterly, pulled over a chair from a nearby table, and sat down. Then, like last time, she propped her chin on her hands and spoke calmly. Don't you feel happy when you get a goal despite it being a lost game? You might have gotten around 20 goals repeatedly. That's really not something a goddess should say in front of a hero. Be happy. I'm only talking about this because it's you. Since it seems like you've already realized quite a few things on your own. God was weird, and Shin Woo, who was similarly weird, was forced into becoming her comrade through her previous comment. He'd thought it may not be true, but this empire, no, this world had no hope. Nice of you to bring me to this despair-ridden world. That's what I thought at first, but now I think you may become this world's new hope. Ethan is already beginning to dawdle, but if it's you, please don't forcefully put all your hopes on me. I'm just doing as I please. So about the reward, God, who'd completely ignored Shin Woo, gently gazed at Shin Woo and said, "You're not planning on getting another quest again, are you? Is there even anything else I can get from you? There are still 1 or 2 things I can give you." God replied humbly towards Shin Woo's snobbish-sounding comment. God probably knew more about his latent potential than he did, so she wasn't lying. Shin Woo briefly ruminated over it. But because the abilities God granted weren't inherently hostile, he just nodded his head, especially because he didn't really want another quest from her. Well, let's hear it. An element. The conversation turned in a completely different direction. Shin Woo, who had been completely uninterested in what she said before, was somewhat surprised. Even I didn't think you would be able to use elemental power so naturally. It would normally be impossible to bestow an element onto a hero, but it should be no problem if I were to bestow one onto you. His abilities had grown and he was extremely talented, so if God were to give him a small nudge, he could awaken a powerful ability. And he pretty much understood what God was saying. It didn't matter if it were fire or lightning, being given a small opportunity was plenty. God was giving him that opportunity. And if you accept this, it should become much easier for you to fight against Ethan. Didn't you say that he was a good hero? He can't compare to you at this point. Looking at her statement in a different way, she was saying that if Shin Woo hadn't defeated one of the 12 generals, then even if he had been done in by Ethan Cruz later, she would just pass it off with a laugh. You're cruel. Seriously, you're one to talk. Shin Woo thought that beings who had surpassed the limitations of humans were different, but God looked at him and snorted. It was as though she saw him as the same as her. Now, focus. All right, the amount of time allotted to them wasn't very long. Shin Woo softly closed his eyes and God released her energy. Shin Woo immediately felt something enter his body, and it was infinitely dark and somber. It was similar to the curse that lingered in the empire. No, that wasn't all. It was quite similar to the curse that he experienced often. What was it? While Shin Woo pondered over the identity of this energy, that energy responded, and Shin Woo lost all feeling in his body. His mana, which possessed no inherent properties, met with the energy as it released, and it assimilated it, and he could feel a change. And soon, a terse response showed up before him. You have acquired the LV1 high-rank element, Darkness. Magic has increased by 100. Curse resistance. MAX has transformed into Darkness resistance, Max. Magic has increased by 20. Darkness is one of the great elements that makes up half of this world. It is peaceful, the power of shadows, the opposite of light, and the power of relationships. But darkness magic makes one forget that they are dead or alive, and can even force them to forget what they are. An imperfect and improper connection results in a twisted appearance, and this causes people to be afraid of it. You have become aware of this power, which originated from within you, due to outside stimuli, and have successfully grasped it. However, if you use too much power, others may become afraid of you. And ultimately, those natural relationships will break down and become twisted. Shin Woo realized why he felt familiar with this power. The relationships he'd created with others, his partnership with Jin, accepting the Pauls as his subordinates, or even more broadly speaking, using the command skill or instigate skill to affect others and manipulate them was all because of the darkness element. However, at the same time, if what he felt was right, then this power was. Didn't the curse come from this element? You're right. To be exact, it was darkness magic that was used as the foundation. Your curse resistance changed into darkness resistance, right? You probably could have brought about that change. God acknowledged him and nodded her head, as if she wasn't spilling a huge secret. You're probably well aware of this, but while you weren't consciously aware of this power, you used it bit by bit. I just awakened it and made it so you could actually use it in a proper form. So, your existence has become much more shocking. Perhaps your karma is heading in that direction. Though she was a god, could she not peruse his stats? At the very least, she didn't show any indication of knowing that he was a joker. Perhaps this was also an effect of the joker karma. There's a huge difference in the results of those who use magic. I know that better than anyone else. So, make sure you work hard. I hope you don't become like the Emperor or Ethan. Then, get going. I was so happy that I ended up giving you way too much. Just 1 second. I'd like to ask you about Redidane. It's impossible for even I to give you information on other heroes more than is necessary. She's a hero, right? She's an ally, right? To top everything off, Shin Woo asked God about his conclusion, and God just laughed and replied. Of course she is. She's a trustworthy hero, more than anyone else. There's nothing more for you to gain here. So, don't come here anymore, and try to gather them. God said enigmatically, and Shin Woo was chased out of God's garden. As expected, Jin seemed to have come back before him. As he was waiting with a sour expression, Shin Woo could see past Jin's steel hard armor now and could tell what expression he was making. Hey Jin, what's up, Shin Woo? Why do I feel even more confused than before I went to clear things up? You shouldn't be asking me. I'm dumb, so don't ask me anything in the future either. It's nice to see you so confident. By meeting with God, Shin Woo realized that he was the center of this situation. That's just how powerful the ability he'd gained was. To be honest, it was really troublesome. He had clearly done his best to roam around the world, as well as figure out the truth, grow step by step, and focus only on ensuring his own safety, but he hadn't really planned on becoming the protagonist and go wild on the main stage. After you gain great power, you get caught up in trouble, huh? I feel like I've heard that line before. Jin tilted his head and Shin Woo continued to play dumb, and in no time, Kraisha returned. Even though she was the first to leave, she was the last to return. But there was a reason for that. Shin Woo, take a look at this. Once she found him, she rushed over to Shin Woo, put her palms together, and pushed them forward. There was a tiny ice crystal floating above them. It was the artifact that exponentially increased her strength, the Orb of Eternal Ice. It got a lot smaller. It'll eventually get so small that you won't be able to see it. But that's not what's important right now. She yelled and tightened her palms together, causing the orb to instantly break apart. Shin Woo was shocked, yet Kraisha remained calm. Soon, he found that the energy that comprised the orb flowed through her body. Her once light purple hair and sky-blue eyes turned silver, and were radiating light. Shin Woo could feel the power of that light, as it seemed to push her magic in a certain direction. Is that lightning shadow? No, it's different from that idiotic technique. Think of my goal as assimilating the eternal ice, the high-rank magic formula. And the power I gain from doing so is... He could tell without listening to her explanation. Since Kraisha had invoked her catalytic magic through the eternal ice, Shin Woo was well aware that now that she'd assimilated the eternal ice, the surrounding mana was quickly being sucked into her and turning into cold air. Contrary to before, where she used the orb to transform the surrounding mana, gather it, and launch it, she could now finally control her magic. It was all due to concentrating the eternal ice's mana internally. Therefore, it was like she had gone from Imperial Dramon Dragon mode to Paladin mode. 1. To make this, I had to use the artifact you gave me, but it's okay since its ability is still intact. But if you were going to do this, wouldn't it have been better to ask to absorb it instead? I'm not you. Ah, that's right, my bad. She talked about how amazing this technique was, and how much stress it put on her body. She made sure to emphasize a few times how human's body was unable to handle catalytic magic, so she used this inconvenient method of storing the orb's power into her body, and that he wouldn't be able to understand her. And she added just one more thing. You should be able to turn yourself into a catalyst without this. I told you I can't. Watch and learn. You know it's not something I can just watch and learn. No matter how he thought it, Kraysha's expectations of him were way too high. Kraysha released her catalyst mode, and pestered him a bit. After that, Shin Woo sighed, though nothing came out, and stood up. Then, he watched over to the LV7, Elite, Chimera Avenger that had just been watching him until now. What will you do now? Are you going to go look for another general? No, we were only able to defeat him because of our information, and our adaptation of the situation. But things won't go this smoothly next time, so now we have to thoroughly prepare and gather our strength. Gather our strength? How right you are. Then how should we do that? The other Kai Pauls heard him and their eyes gleamed. It seemed as though they were still misunderstanding something, so Shin Woo decided to be honest with them. You guys will move separately from me. You need to become stronger your own way, and I have to get stronger my own way as well. Of course we're not going our separate ways forever. How can that be? We weren't going to continue to travel with you? I don't feel that we can burn with hatred and revenge without you there to guide us. Shin Woo smiled bitterly at their response. Of course, they were a powerful force. They were a group of level 6 elites with even a level 7 elite as well, so if he were to travel with them, he wouldn't die in most situations. However, objectively speaking, neither side would be able to properly grow. It would almost be like a restriction on them. It would be restricting to both Shin Woo and the Kai Pauls. I don't plan on controlling you through your hatred alone. For now, go where your feet take you. Watch the current world with your own 2 eyes, there should be something you get from it. It's fine if it's hatred or a completely different emotion. In the end, you'll be able to get even stronger. The current world, rather than bring them along with him, it'd be better to release them onto the world's stage. Moreover, he could just bring them when he really needed them. They'll eventually fight together, even if he didn't want to. So, for him, as well as for the purpose of purifying the Empire and their own growth, it would be best to go their separate ways. We still don't really understand. It's much too vague. Before you go, there's something I need to show you. It might even encourage you. A place you need to show us? Something that will encourage us? Yeah. Shin Woo looked at the Kai Pauls, his completely destroyed surroundings, Kraysha, who was blankly staring at him, Jin, as well as the collapsed satellite city, Kadinan. He smiled bitterly. His original plan had been so much simpler, so how did things turn out like this? Now, shall we go and see what's hidden within the secret facilities? Are you going to show me too? What's with you all of a sudden? Kraysha became a bit happy at Shin Woo's words. To be honest, he thought it would turn out like this when he had first asked her for help, but it wasn't a bad feeling to be recognized by one's information-sharing partner. Hey, he's a skeleton. I know, he's a skeleton who's really good at handling magic. Jin commented from beside her, but Kraysha tilted her head as if to say, and what about it? Shin Woo heard their chat, but he had no idea what they were even talking about. So you got a request from the golems? Yeah, we've been in contact even before then. Are you saying that there are knights who succeeded the experiment? Shin Woo led the party, entered the facility, and explained the events to Kraysha. It was also an explanation to the Kai Pauls, who were turned into golems and sacrificed for the experiment. The Golden General, Urema Steelworker. The reason I didn't tell you earlier was because I was concerned that you might go looking for him. Plus, it would have become a pain for us, as we need to use the golem trains. I understand, Kraysha agreed. If it were her from a few months back that was extremely curious about how golems worked, she might have stuck with Shin Woo and been a pain in the ass. Of course, she was different now. She knew when she could be greedy and when she needed to resign herself. If they figured out who I am, they would be suspicious. Assuming that they know about every single hero in the Empire, there's no reason to link us with the heroes. As you know, we don't look like heroes, right? Yeah, so long as we don't know their intent, there's no reason to tell them about the heroes. While conversing, they explored every nook and cranny of the facility. The Kai Pauls heard Shin Woo talk about other golems, as well as finding traces of other knights being sacrificed as test subjects just like them, and began to feel a powerful emotion that they couldn't define. The test succeeded, but they were indeed sacrificed. To think that there's a core capable of making someone absolutely loyal. Yet, that core is what allowed us to be reborn. Though there's no trace of it anymore. Do you think they're hostile to the Emperor as well? They're probably not like us. Moreover, Urema Steelworker? I remembered when I heard his name. It seemed like he wanted to hide it, but we saw it. One Kai Paul spoke in the middle of the other Kai Pauls. It seemed as though its intellect was far greater than the other Kai Pauls, probably as much as the level 7. It compared the memories of countless knights' imperfect memories and extracted them, coming into possession of a massive amount of intact memories. Isn't it him? The one who recommended this damn plan to the Emperor? Is that true? What did you say? That's the first even Shin Woo had heard of it. He immediately turned his head, and the Kai Paul stepped back slightly, as if flustered, and bowed his head. I'm sure. I couldn't be sure before, due to the fragmented memories, but I can tell now. The one who recommended that the Emperor turn knights into golems was. No, the one who first introduced the technique of making golems came from him. Is that so? Urema Steelworker was definitely the one who proposed the experiment, but he'd never told Shin Woo who had come up with the plan. Moreover, at the time of the experiment, he had volunteered himself and pledged his loyalty to the Emperor, so he hadn't lied. The truth was merely hidden, it wasn't a lie. Even so, it's still deception. Shin Woo's mouth gaped, as though his jawbone would fall out, but he was smiling. That's because he'd gotten a hint from a place he'd never expected to get one from. He sent me here himself, but to think I'd hear about this from the knights who were supposed to be buried in the past. Moreover, he probably didn't think that there was a way to gather all the knights' fragmented memories and rebuild them. Of course he wouldn't know. Shin Woo hadn't known either. Even so, was there anything that changed? They just went from loyal psychos to people who got a hold of themselves and ran away following the Emperor's activation of the curse, no? Well, that could be it. But if Urema Steelworker was the one to recommend the formation of the Golem army, then Shin Woo was remembering. All the golems possessed a mark that allowed the Emperor to control them, and under that, Guillotine Steelworker and the others held a high-rank administrative mark. Then under that was a general administrator's mark. But from what I remember, Urema Steelworker possessed a mark for just himself, one that wasn't the Emperor's mark, or even the Steelworker mark. Of course, he probably needed it to control the Golem army. Rather than the Emperor giving orders, it would be much better for the general, Urema Steelworker, to be commanding the troops in battle. However, if he was the one who started everything, and if he had a different intention in mind. What if Urema Steelworker's mark is even higher than the Emperor's? His sharp statement caused everyone to keep their mouths shut. At that moment, Shin Woo, who had been feeling up the wall, stopped his hand. At his fingertips, the Steelworker mark was radiating a blinding light. He'd finally found the facility within the facility, the entrance to the secret area. A dark secret and a buried testing facility. Within that facility was another hidden area. It was an area that could only be opened with the Steelworker seal, not the General Administrator's seal. Wait a sec, Steelworker? The Steelworker seal was revealed, and while he was studying the lock, he discovered some information. Shin Woo grinned because he didn't think his hypothesis would be confirmed immediately. Only a Steelworker can enter. The Emperor can't go in? Yep, it's not just Urema Steelworker who can access it. Guillotine Steelworker and the other level 7 golems can get inside as well. Aside from them, there's no one who has permission to enter. Which means that the Emperor can't go in. How did you figure that out by just looking at it? Nope, never mind. Don't look at me like that. Jin looked quizzical and was about to ask further, but thought better of it. He kicked Shin Woo's eye sockets with his forelegs, as Shin Woo had turned around to look at him. Shin Woo hastily evaded his kick and continued with his explanation. If I hadn't heard what the Kai Pauls had said before, I might have just thought that this place was for staff only. But after hearing what they had to say, and seeing another hidden installation. Are you saying that Urema Steelworker, as well as those who hold the steelworker name, had a different secret plan. So, a plan that he started not out of loyalty for the emperor? It probably wasn't a pure motive. How can that be? Once they heard Shin Woo's conclusion, the Kai Pauls were infuriated. Of course, they didn't have even a shred of loyalty towards the emperor anymore. However, when they thought about the fact their pure feelings had been used, they felt an unrestrained rage. However, these infuriated Kai Pauls focused on Shin Woo's calm voice. Calm down. You can't do anything with just anger. However, Arama Steelworker is a powerful level 8. He has a few level 7 elite subordinates around him, and he has several level 6 golems under his command. I'm saying that he's not an opponent you can overcome with just your powerful emotions. His rational and cool-headed statement caused the Kai Pauls to be silent. Shin Woo placed a hand on one of the Kai Pauls and softly laughed. He didn't speak to just one Kai Paul, but spoke loud enough so that all the others could hear him. Don't let your emotions just burn. Use them as fuel and temper them. There are countless ways for you to get stronger in this world, and if you work at it, it's not impossible for you to surpass Arama Steelworker. Do you want to be controlled by your emotions and be a tiger moth, or do you want to take control over your emotions and become a phoenix? That's up to you. The Kai Paul. No, all the Kai Pauls must have felt something from Shin Woo's speech, as they nodded their heads in silence. Shin Woo smiled faintly, and Jin hit his back. Shin Woo, you're so sickening that I feel like I'm going to throw up. Speaking earnestly works on these types of guys. Look, their eyes are sparkling. You're really scary? Shin Woo, who had silenced Jin with a short reply, confirmed that the Kai Pauls had calmed down, and returned to the main topic. The existence of a secret facility that only a steelworker can access, and the emperor who ordered the undead to watch this entire area. This has made it clear. The emperor knew that something was hidden here, and he must have known that this was what steelworker was aiming for. And Arama Steelworker is. He knows what the emperor is doing. That's why he wanted us to attack from the front. After I had diverted the emperor's attention and had taken care of the vestiges of the testing facility, he must have been planning on coming here quietly later. Either side is ridiculous. The Kai Paul was right. You could only look down on people so much. Of course, it was a relief that Shin Woo wasn't someone who took things lying down, but Shin Woo's expression was actually relaxed. There was no shaking in his goblin fire. If I completely clear this place and return unscathed, then they won't be able to look down on me anymore. That's when it'll start in earnest. Will they perceive me as a threat and try to take me out, or will they try to use me? Shin Woo thought it would be the latter. Like they had said, their enemies were the same. That's the only thing he was sure about. And to be honest, that wasn't really a bad thing for Shin Woo. Why? If I know what they're thinking to a degree, then it shouldn't be difficult to get them onto my stage. He finished speaking and simultaneously, the steelworker mark above his hand radiated light. It looked a bit different from when he had first used it, but he had been continuously studying the mark. This was the result of his improvements and calculations. It possessed some additional function as well, but the most prioritized additional function was secrecy. Shin Woo was concerned that the information would get back to Arama Steelworker, so he had added this function in. It was an additional function he had created so that wherever he was, or whatever he was doing wouldn't be reported. It was a fundamentally high-level and shocking security feature. Opening the facility. Welcome, Steelworker. They wouldn't know right away that Shin Woo had even entered the facility. Of course, even if they came to find him themselves, they would have no way of knowing that Shin Woo had entered the facility. Yuwa, Wa, Jin and Kratia simultaneously exclaimed. It was only natural as the lock was released, revealing a secret passageway. Contrary to the outside, where the passage of time was readily apparent, as it was corroded everywhere and had accumulated dust, the passageway was ridiculously clean and refined. There was no rust anywhere. Rocks which radiated light by themselves were embedded everywhere and illuminated the passageway. There was no way of knowing how they had made such a thing. For now, let's take these with us since they seem expensive. You're terrible. There wasn't a use for them really, but they looked expensive, so he decided to extract them. He'd benefited off of collecting all of the wine from the winery before, so Shin Woo thought he might be able to profit again. Why don't you take some too? It seems like it'd be useful for when I want to read a book in the dark, so I'll just take one. That'll make your eyes go bad, so don't do it too much. Shin Woo ordered the Kai Pauls to collect all the rocks. He told them to bring one over to him, and when he looked it over, he found that it was made of sunlight stone. It possessed the energy of the sun, and would emit a light equivalent to the rays of the sun. It was an incredibly rare ore. He checked the information and thought that perhaps the light that shined on the Empire came from here. No, when he thought about it, the magical device set up in the vineyard the Dryads were staying it was seemingly made of the same ore. But there was only one of them there, so what were these golems indulging? As I thought, they seem like a separate group. Hey, on your hand. Shin Woo was speechless and Kracia suddenly looked at the steelworkers as enemies. At that moment, Jin suddenly called out to Shin Woo. When he checked why he was calling him, the sunlight stone made a frightening sound and began transforming. Through bone reinforcement, the sunlight stone is transforming. You have acquired the solar fossil. I told you, fossils aren't bones. Whatever. Before the change, the sunlight stone looked like a rock that emitted light, but once it had finished changing into a solar fossil, it turned into a gray color and emitted powerful light and heat from within. Its properties had definitely been reinforced. Unfortunately, the diffusion of light decreased, so he could no longer use it as a light source, but Shin Woo didn't really care about any of that. I'm going to try absorbing it. Shin Woo tried to absorb one of them. Then, surprisingly, his magic increased by 1, and his fire element proficiency increased by a little. At that moment, his eyes became serious. He thought that these stones might be more important than whatever was hidden within the facility. Bring all of those to me. I understand. Besides the one sunlight stone that Kracia wanted, Shin Woo changed all of the other sunlight stones through bone reinforcement. He had obtained a total of 223 solar fossils. If he could, he would absorb all of them right here, but it seemed as though it wasn't such a simple matter, so he would set some time later and patiently study them. That's right, I'll give you one too. Thank you. Shin Woo, who had finished changing the sunlight stones into solar fossils, called over a Kai Paul and allowed him to absorb it. He had only given them one as he didn't want to be the one who hoarded all of them, but it had a surprising effect. How can this be? Look at this, Sir Paul 0. Ooh! Flame burst forth from the Kai Paul's hand, which emitted an intense heat. The solar fossil allowed him to control fire. Of course, bone reinforcement was a cheat skill that allowed one to absorb a bone's abilities, but even so, absorbing one of those bones and gaining the ability to wield fire was plenty amazing. Perhaps this was only possible because it was a chimera? Fire is coming out of my hand. Kukeuk. The black flame dragon sealed within my right arm is finally 1. The excited Shin Woo finally made the other Kai Pauls absorb a single solar fossil each, although only a third of the Kai Pauls awakened an intermediate level of fire. It was obviously impossible for them to handle it so naturally like Shin Woo, but despite that, they were still at the level of an intermediate monster who could manipulate fire. The Kai Paul force's power had been upgraded instantly. Thank you, Sir Paul 0. To think that you could bestow a new power upon us so simply. The Kai Pauls had gone beyond admiration or loyalty and looked to be in awe of Shin Woo now. He had just been lucky. Kracia and Jin, who had both been watching the process from the side, thought that Shin Woo looked like some sort of pseudo-religious sect leader, but they didn't actually say it out loud. If they argued about what was right or wrong, it felt like the Kai Pauls would start to stare at them unkindly. We've arrived. Are there no more sunlight stones? There's a really big one over there. Remember to extract it before we leave. I understand. At their unexpected increase in power, all the Kai Pauls were excited, and at that moment, they arrived at their destination. The sunlight stone embedded into the high ceiling illuminated every area of the facility. There was a bookshelf on the surface of one of the walls filled with materials. He assumed that this was both the laboratory and the conference room. These materials, they're all related to golems. Shin Woo was sure he'd hit the jackpot. The more Shin Woo surveyed these lottery ticket, these Powerball materials, the more excited he got. He looked over the materials detailing a golem's inner structure, and an anatomical chart that detailed the part that connected the golem's body to a core, and felt his excitement reach its peak. His goblin fire blazed so much that it threatened to engulf his skull. With these, I should be able to make my own golems, right? Oh, really? Oh, holy crap. Jin was freaked out by Shin Woo's muttering. But Kratia, who had just as much interest in golems as Shin Woo, managed to find another area while he was looking over the materials. She called for Shin Woo, though her voice was quivering. Look here, Shin. I mean Paul Zero. Shin Woo placed the entire bookshelf into his inventory and turned around. It seemed like there was another small passageway in the corner of the facility, and when they followed that path. How many of these are there? The moment he discovered it, Shin Woo thoughtlessly clenched his fists. The sunlight stones are more profitable than the contents of the facility? What a joke. There was a laboratory there, with countless rows of gleaming silver cores. Original core, a power source capable of producing LV6 golems. There were of 277 cores lying around. Shin Woo and Kratia were mesmerized by the cores, and just watched them silently. The original core. They were definitely the original form of the original bone core. Shin Woo had barely gotten one or two of them by destroying all of the low-ranked golems in an area, yet there were so many gathered here. If Shin Woo spoke automatically. If there were this many cores gathered here, it makes sense that they'd want them back. This many cores would interest not only Arama Steelworker, but the Emperor as well. That's probably why he kept a general on standby. Though that general was now dead. He didn't know when the Emperor would get news of that, but he didn't need to worry about that right now. You get stronger if you absorb these, right? No. When you absorb bones with the same power, the effectiveness drops. Now I can't really get anything out of them. So, with these, you're going to try making golems? Kratia was quick on the uptake. Her eyes glittered with curiosity. That was what Shin Woo was looking for. No matter how talented he was at magic, it was still just talent. Because he wasn't knowledgeable in magic theory, he knew that he would need someone else's help if he really decided to make a golem. To be honest, he could have taken down the general by himself if he did well. The reason he had asked for her help was because he knew something like this would happen once he discovered the facility that Arama Steelworker tried to hide. It'd be hard to make them right now, so let's move the equipment for now. Let's say that you can move them because you have an inventory, but do you have the space to store them? Of course I do. Shin Woo grinned and spoke while Kratia just tilted her head. He let her be and deliberated on what he should do with the original cores. The main point of deliberation was whether he should just store the original cores or change them into bone cores first. It would probably be okay to change them, since all of the materials for making golems will be changed through that ability of yours. Giving the materials a sense of unity. You're right, it doesn't sound like a bad idea. Kratia's recommendation was decent. Of course, bone reinforcement wouldn't always upgrade the material, but the cores were one of the few exceptions, as the quantity of magic within wouldn't change with the transformation. It wasn't like he couldn't use them as cores once they transformed into bone cores. Also, there wouldn't be a loss from transforming them, so there was enough value in doing so. Shin Woo changed all of the cores in one go and stored them into his inventory. Because his inventory had expanded significantly following his level up, there was a lot of free space. Now, shall we start storing them? Alright, I'll take the left side. Then I'll go over there. The party collected the cores, turned around, and removed and collected the equipment as well. To be honest, there were some amongst them that shouldn't have been thoughtlessly removed, but Shin Woo and Kratia, who had a good grasp of magic, skillfully separated them, meticulously inspected them, and collected them so that there wouldn't be any trouble. Only 5 minutes had passed, yet nothing valuable had remained within the facility. The golems will probably get mad if they see these later, right? It's all right, they won't see it, Shin Woo said, and ordered the chimeras to collect the large sunlight stone. Because the sunlight stone was so large, the transformation was an incredibly unusual sight. Once he placed it into his inventory, the facility immediately became dark. The only words that would come out of his mouth were, "Oh, come on. You guys go first, Shin Woo? I need to install a bomb before I go." Are you serious? They hadn't noticed the 6 drake horn lances floating in the air from behind Shin Woo. No, when they thought about it, there were 3 or 4 of them floating behind them when they first entered. Jin recollected that and realized that that's when Shin Woo had decided to blow up the facility. You can make it so they don't know it was us? There'll probably be no traces left. Shin Woo laughed briefly and sent the rest of the party away. Then, whenever a drake horn lance was fully charged, he would burrow it here and there. Because he'd already demolished much of the equipment that protected the facility, so long as he calculated the location and installed them properly, the 6 drake horn lances should be able to completely destroy the place. Nice. This is perfect. However, while Shin Woo was finishing with the bomb installation and leaving the passageway, he felt his chest vibrate. It was the communication line that Kadinen's lord had possessed that enabled him to communicate with Hansen. Hansen was already dead, so who was it? He didn't plan on asking something so boorish. Who could it be? It was obviously either the Emperor or one of the Emperor's men. Shin Woo grinned and raised the communication line. He inputted the bothersome monoseal and accepted the call. It was then he'd left the facility, closed the door, and turned around. Kadinen's lord, Nelopa, did the Lightning Shadow General return? He could feel the military discipline within the extremely stiff voice. As expected, it seemed like the Lightning Shadow General had someone supervising him, even though he worked alone. Also, considering the fact that he didn't add an honorific to his name, it was possible that he was talking to someone really high up. And if that's the case, there was a high chance that this person was one of the 12 generals as well. Obviously, showing this guy his identity, even a little bit, wasn't a good idea. He activated acting and disguise simultaneously. It happened in the blink of an eye. The Lightning Shadow General is. Nelopa's voice naturally flowed out of Shin Woo's mouth, and he heard the other whisper, so he was just late. The sound of his small sigh had to be a sign of relief. He decided to break that apart. The Lightning Shadow General passed away. What? Shin Woo reported, sounding as though he were stifling his tears, and quickly turned the situation around. The other individual raised his voice immediately. Who dares? How? A golem? Was it a golem? Kuuk, that's correct. Arama Steelworker? We expected the 4 commanders, but to think Arama Steelworker would act in person. Is he starting an all-out war? But it's too early. How can he be so confident? Moreover, how did he conceal his energy and move so secretly? That's right. Arama Steelworker was probably too scared to act in person, as he didn't want to be seen. That's why he had sent someone from the outside, like Shin Woo, despite it being an important mission to collect more than 200 cores. Shin Woo, who knew that it wouldn't be easy for them to believe it, gave them something to convince them. They're on the same side of these guys called Anti-Skull. Quack, Anti-Skull. Sagald, tell me in more detail. No, is there someone else there? They're listening in on us. You have to close the connection? Kuok, he said, and forcefully broke the communication line. Plus, the 6 drake horn lances exploded early, making it so that the sounds of the explosions were transferred through the communication line. With this, they would think that the enemy was watching Nelopa, and after communicating for a bit, he resisted at the very last moment. He was hit by one of the enemy's powerful attacks, lost his life, and the communication line was destroyed. Nice. Shin Woo's acting skill had improved rapidly. He then walked away from the collapsed facility and laughed. Even from his own point of view, his acting was pretty good. Now they couldn't be unaware of Steelworker or Anti-Skull anymore. Now that I've finished everything up, let's go. You, however, when the party, who were just watching Shin Woo, were about to leave, Jin retorted. Why did you drag Anti-Skull into this all of a sudden? Their headquarters is way too hard to find, so I thought I could use the Emperor's side to draw them out. Plus, it would make me sound more credible. Of course, I want the Steelworkers to expose what they're planning as they come outside and act, so I involved Anti-Skull. Why are you looking at me like that? I won't be mad, so tell me honestly. You're a demon, right? Shin Woo wanted to pass it off as a joke and laugh, but Jin's burning goblin fire looked extremely honest. He ended up getting slightly hurt. What an amazing act, as expected of Sir Paul Zero. Though the Kai Pauls revered Shin Woo, they were likewise shocked. No, he'd just done something anyone could do, so why were they? Shin Woo looked at Kraisha as his last hope. As expected, Kraisha didn't betray his trust and gave him a thumbs up. Nice explosion, so much so that I want to recreate it with magic. Ah, is that so? When he looked back, because of the huge explosion inside, the entire area had caved in. It seemed like the fissure would affect them soon, so they prioritized evading that area first. He decided to part ways with the Kai Pauls there. I'll get stronger no matter what. I'll collect a lot of bones. Call me whenever you need me. I'm sure that if we're with you, Sir Paul Zero, that we can kill the Emperor and Arama Steelworker. I will only follow you from now on. It seemed like his acting had left a huge impression on them, and their attitude towards Li Shin Woo suddenly changed to that of military discipline. Li Shin Woo ruminated over whether he should be happy or sad about that. In any case, he had formed a subordinate relationship with them, so he decided to just accept reality. Go well, Kai Pauls. Get stronger, so much so that you can take on a general. The Kai Pauls gathered in one place and quickly sprinted off. Li Shin Woo waved his hand at them as they began vanishing into the distance. Then, Kraisha quietly asked Li Shin Woo a question. Shin Woo, how many of these guys have you been catching and releasing? You won't believe me even if I told you. I'm confident that I believe you, even if you said you were the hidden 13th general. Whenever you talk with a hero, you just say whatever you want. They exchanged jokes as they moved towards the Golem production facility, or in other words, the Golem train that led to Arama Steelworkers' headquarters. Of course, it didn't take very long for them, and when they reached the top of the hill, they suddenly realized exactly what they had done. Kadinan was wiped out, and the secret facility had blown up and collapsed. There was no way anyone would be able to tell what had happened by just looking at it. Then, I just have to go here and wait? Yeah, you shouldn't take very long, right? Yeah, they temporarily parted ways with Kraisha. She, who was a level 7 and possessed the ability to teleport, checked the designated location and nodded her head. If need be, Li Shin Woo would test out the bone gate he had received, but she left without saying a word, so he felt a bit disappointed. Then let's get going too. But Shin Woo, if they've already figured out what we've done and try to kill us, then we can just die a few times and then get out. Don't worry so much. Jin was afraid of Li Shin Woo's bold plan, as he was marching over to Arama Steelworkers' headquarters just to flip him off, but in terms of their results, the golems weren't yet aware of what they had done. No, rather than be aware of what they had done, they actually greeted them affectionately. Did you put them all to rest? I just wanted to let you know how disappointed I am in you guys. If we made a mistake, we would have had to fight against a general. As expected, we just wanted to know if we could work well together in the future. Listen, you already knew, right? So with this, you've realized that I'm no pushover, right? Of course, we know now that you guys are skilled enough to fight alongside us. I wonder, it seems like you don't really know yet. Li Shin Woo inwardly mocked Guillotine. Then, Guillotine unexpectedly extended a fist. Is he asking for a fist bump? Without even realizing, Li Shin Woo extended his own fist, but then, Guillotine opened his hand, revealing the contents within. This is the reward we promised. Treat it well, since it's something that we poured all of our technical skill into making. Guillotine said, and Li Shin Woo automatically nodded his head. He opened his own hand. Above Guillotine's hand lay a golem that resembled a small bird. LV6 Observer Golem. This quest was now complete. Chapter 27, New Golem Maker. Once Li Shin Woo and Jin had parted ways with Guillotine, they wordlessly took the golem train and returned to the level 2 danger zone. The facility was close to the area where the past city, Kahebi, had been. But there was something cheerfully chatting by their side while they were being silent. Please take care me, Sir Li Shin Woo. Henceforth, I am in charge of supporting you in battle and scouting. Please give me a name. Please give me a name. I will explain my abilities again. I possess high agility and strength, but my health is incredibly low, so please handle me with care. I have some magic as well. Please give me a name. My most effective ability is the subspace. With the latest techniques that were created through high-rank magic engineering, I can hold a maximum of 4,000 zeta. Li Shin Woo finally raised his head. He had almost arrived at his destination, the Kerr Century Winery. Before then, he needed to fix this guy. Is it a relief that they're misunderstanding us? Misunderstanding? Yeah, they held the unyielding belief that the steelworker seal could only be obtained by a steelworker. That pride, that was Guillotine's sole mistake, and also his worst. Because of that, Li Shin Woo was able to clear out the entire facility without garnering any suspicion, and even now. I'll give you name, so come over here. I underst. Li Shin Woo's hand came closer and tightly grabbed onto the observer golem. He could tell that this guy was sent to spy on him, even without seeing its name. But he didn't know who exactly ordered it to spy on him, or whether he should either extract information from it, dispose of it, or try to find some other use for it. To find that out, he had been observing it, so he hadn't acted immediately. If this guy's orders could only be changed through the use of Arama Steelworker's seal, then I would have had to give up and just dispose of it. However, that wasn't the case. This guy's maker, as well as administrator, were Guillotine. Maybe Arama Steelworker trusts Guillotine a lot? He couldn't say that this entire quest was due to Guillotine's decision, but Li Shin Woo was sure that Guillotine possessed quite a bit of authority. And, if it's at this level, then I can change it as much as I want with my own authority. Li Shin Woo no longer had a pure steelworker seal. After countless improvements, he had successfully acquired an independent authority, and it was simple for him to erase Guillotine's order as if it weren't there and add in his own. And here, he hadn't had the observer golem for very long, but right now, he had plenty of time to experiment. Li Shin Woo made that decision, activated his administrator seal whilst simultaneously infusing in a completely different mana. Name, that radiating, gentle gray energy was none other than his high-rank darkness element. Because darkness was the element that controlled contracts, he thought that he would be able to ignore the pre-existing command authority and create a new relationship with it. That's why he had tried it, but the effect was truly outstanding. Recognizing highest command authority, when the administrator seal accepted the darkness element and radiated an even more intense light, a black light spread throughout the observer golem's body. It sounded like it was breaking, and at that moment, something seemingly burst out of a part of its body. Then, it spoke in a much more calm voice than before. Pausing record, deactivating surveillance function, deactivating information transmission function. Information transmission. So when were you going to send a report to Guillotine Steelworker? In a week. I'd like to make up a report so that they don't get suspicious, but can you input that kind of information? Of course. More energy surged from Li Shin Woo's hand and permeated the golem. The golem only processed the information that would be okay for Steelworker to see and which could be transmitted to him, and obviously, it was incredibly difficult work, but fortunately, Li Shin Woo had a book he could reference. Let's see. Wait just a second, Jin. In one hand, he carried an opened, worn-out book, and in the other, he held the small golem. Li Shin Woo, who was constantly emitting black energy, looked like he was from some kind of evil cult at best. As always, Jin didn't really know what Li Shin Woo was doing, but he decided to do as he was told and watch his surroundings. Li Shin Woo closed the book after several minutes. All right, I can, is this much okay? Any deficient areas can be fixed at a later time. Nice. I'll make some more adjustments after I've studied some more and when the time is right. I understand. However, Li Shin Woo didn't let go of the golem. He thought that at this rate, when or if Arama Steelworker intervenes, his authority could get taken away. And the only way to create a firm relationship which cannot be disturbed by anyone is. Let's change the programming a bit, shall we? I'll program it with the absolute concept that ownership is higher than command authority. It's possible. In order to prevent a few minor bugs from doing so, I will prioritize removing Steelworker's ability to intervene. Go ahead. Jin couldn't understand their conversation at all, and after they spoke a few more times, he saw mana coming out of the golem's body finally, while Li Shin Woo's mana filled the vacancy. Li Shin Woo meticulously examined the entire golem once more, and then laughed with certainty. The power of the darkness mana, both absolute and able to transcend logic, altered the golem's very structure. And at the moment of his success, the mode is complete, master. From the outside, the small golem looked like a living, breathing hawk. Its eyeballs, made of gems, focused on Li Shin Woo and shined whilst speaking the word, master. This was proof that the absolute authority had been safely created, something which hadn't existed before. What would Guillotine Steelworker think if he knew that Li Shin Woo had completely remodeled the surveillance unit and made it devote itself to him? Of course, he would never know. Nice. From now on your name is Rem. 1. Your naming sense is really too much. With the combination of his golem knowledge and his darkness magic, he had created his first child, so he gave it a proper name. Hearing that, Jin was shocked. As Shin Woo's orders were absolute and it had become completely loyal to him, the observer golem could not, unfortunately, even voice its complaints, as it didn't even have that function. I understand, Master. Shin Woo gave it a name, and right at the moment when it accepted its name, a large quantity of mana was released from Shin Woo's body, and automatically changed into the darkness element. He felt that deeply, and suddenly realized just how important a name was in a master-servant contract. No, maybe his mana had responded like that because he thought the name was important. The observer golem, Rem, has been completely subordinated. Because of your achievement, you have caused a huge change in Rem. Huh? A message similar to when he had established a master and servant relationship with the Pauls or the Kai Pauls appeared, and at the same time, Rem's body was engulfed in darkness mana. Shin Woo heard a cracking sound from within the mana, and gritted his teeth at Rem's changing appearance. If I knew this was going to happen, I would have named it Rem Paul. Yeah, the transformation process wasn't very long. Rem's now exposed form was truly shocking. What had originally looked like a living hawk from the outside had changed into bone. Though its body was made up of bones, they weren't thin bones. On top of its tough, bony frame was another layer of bone, covering it like skin. It resembled a hawk, and its lovely ivory, curved bone looked like it was chiseled by a sculptor, making it look extremely refined and beautiful. It looked as though it weren't even a golem or an undead. It gave off the feeling that it was a living being made up of bone. I'd be happy if I got to look like that. It's definitely pretty, but when Guillotine asks for it, how are you going to show it to him? Shin Woo was both in awe and concerned as he looked at the transformed Rem. However, a message appeared in front of him that he hadn't expected in the least. Through your ability in mana, this golem has been bestowed with a karma. By acting as though it were an ally, it will approach other golems, implant your darkness into them, and ultimately cause them to change and be reborn. It has awoken this ability called Mana Parasite. You have created a Joker's pet, a cuckoo. The cuckoo will share a portion of your innate skills, and based on its role, its abilities will become even greater. Perhaps an even more dramatic evolution awaits it in the future. LV6 Cuckoo Golem, Rem. I thought it was a bit small. It wasn't a hawk, but a cuckoo. Why, did you make something weird again? Yeah, and it's really strange this time. The skill that Rem had awakened was much too amazing for him to dismiss it as weird. It seemed as though him using both the Administrator Seal and his Darkness Mana, as well as acquiring the ownership authority had had a considerable effect on Rem. To be honest, Shin Woo himself didn't really know how this kind of change had occurred. It probably wouldn't work on the steelworkers, though. No, it's nothing. From now on, Shin Woo thought he would use the same process that he'd used on Rem on any high-rank golems he encountered, level 6 golems or greater that were under steelworkers' direct control, but with this, things got a lot easier. He was especially pleased by the fact that Rem could share a portion of the Joker's innate skills, acting, disguise, instigate. It meant that, at the very least, it wouldn't be discovered by steelworker. Moreover, based on this guy's growth, it may be able to do something more amazing in the future. Please call me Rem from now on. Master, please take care of me. Alright, Rem, take care of me too. He didn't know if Rem was aware that it had done a 180 and gone in a completely opposite direction from its original mission, as it naively perched upon Shin Woo's shoulder. That looked a lot better. It had gotten a lot stronger in various aspects when it transformed into a cuckoo golem, so he could actually use it in battle, and it also possessed a subspace, so it would help in various ways. Above all, the best part was that it had gotten smaller, so it was easier to carry around. The reason he had refused the Pauls, the golems, and the Kai Pauls from accompanying him was not only because they wanted to change the empire, but because they were way too big, so they would get in the way of his work. Wait a sec, if this guy has a subspace and can move quickly, then can't this guy collect loot? It is possible to change the location of my subspace, as well as automatically send anything inside to that location. Ooh, they marveled at Rem's subspace ability, the newest addition of their party, and hurried towards the winery. Rem's Mana Parasite ability, which came from Shin Woo's karma. Unfortunately, Shin Woo didn't know just how amazing that ability would be in the future. When Shin Woo arrived at the winery, he found that, surprisingly, Kraisha had gotten there first. He told her about the lock on the winery and opened the door. Whilst going down, Kracia couldn't hold herself back and asked a question. What's that? My name is Rem. I am a golem who serves Master Li Shin Woo. I told you about it before. That they would try to use me. It was intended to be a surveillance unit. Huh? Tell me more about that. Kracia was different from Jin. Jin completely gave up on understanding Li Shin Woo, but Kracia, once she learned that Li Shin Woo possessed a unique ability that she didn't have, somehow understood it, opened her mind, and attempted to invent a completely new technique, even while knowing that it wouldn't be able to replicate Li Shin Woo's ability. Li Shin Woo wasn't the stingy type who withheld information and told her in fair detail about how he'd reprogrammed Rem and created a new command authority of ownership. The darkness element. She'd already heard about the ability that Li Shin Woo had gained from God, though it's more accurate to say that it was awakened. But when Li Shin Woo explained that he'd achieved a new feat by using the remodeled Steelworker seal in tandem with the darkness element's mana, Kracia smiled bitterly. That's impossible for me, though I can think of a few ways to defend against it. Nice, tell me, so I can make it even better. Sure, as much as you want, is what I'd like to say, but before that. Kracia stretched out her hand and pointed at the corridor behind them. It was filled with equipment designed to preserve wine. It was originally a winery, so it seemed obvious. Help me clear all this up first. I'm not going to clear those out. You see, I'm going to dig up a new space right next to it for the golem-making equipment. Still, isn't this equipment useless? Kracia was cutely tilting her head. That's right. Li Shin Woo realized that he hadn't given her a proper explanation regarding this winery. Of course, it would be fine if he didn't explain, it would probably be fine. Before that, shall we form a new contract, Kracia? It's scary, so don't come over while spewing black mana. There was no way she wouldn't be afraid of a skeleton approaching her whose eye sockets blazed with a blackish-red goblin fire, and spewing out black mana with one hand. However, he had made the bilateral contract fairer, so that she would agree to the terms, and she soon realized that Li Shin Woo was trying to help her make a solid contract. It's a promise with mana, right? Then we're partners now too. No, not really. You're colder than the Winter Queen. Partners would be the best word to describe their relationship. They would help each other when they were in range of each other, and they would combine their abilities for joint research. Of course, there was a chance that that relationship became even deeper later along the line. We'll keep each other's secret, and if we're in range, we help each other out. This is good enough, right? Yeah. Once she consented with the terms of the bilateral contract, darkness mana spread from Li Shin Woo's hand and intertwined both their hands. Soon, the darkness mana just melted away. A simple message appeared before Li Shin Woo. You have formed a cooperative relationship with Kracia Meloy. When you stand on the same battlefield as her, the effects of the rebellion skill are partly shared with her. How many abilities do you even have? How many species live in this world? I'm joking. He'd formed a proper contract with Kracia, so he didn't need to hide anything from her. He, Kracia, and Jin went past the winery and entered the underground passageway. Because Li Shin Woo had increased the security on the underground passageway the other day, Kracia still wasn't aware of its existence until he opened it. I'm so frustrated. I just moved these security devices, which hid and maintained the facility even during the time of the Empire, so it makes sense that you didn't notice it. But you said you're the one who moved them. Moreover, he didn't just move them. Li Shin Woo had remodeled and reinforced them. It was originally very complex, but he had made it even more so, therefore, it seemed obvious that Kracia wouldn't been able to spot it. And whenever Li Shin Woo's abilities grew, the security system would only grow stronger. What exactly were you hiding here? Ah, a vineyard. Kracia remembered that Li Shin Woo didn't want to clear out the wine facilities, as well as when he gave her an overwhelming quantity of grapes, and quickly made a conjecture. However, she soon tilted her head. You haven't been growing grapes here, have you? Yeah, I wasn't growing grapes. Then were the grapes you gave me from the winery? It didn't seem like it though. Probably? On Earth, grapes were definitely divided between those for wine use and eating. Grapes meant for eating would make the wine tasteless, and wine grapes, which would create a heavenly sweet-tasting wine, were bitter when eaten. But in Haguroa, or at least the Underground Empire, Haida, there was a very thin line dividing the two. Brewers had repeatedly experimented so that they could create a delicious wine regardless of what kind of grape they used. This was because they used magic, which didn't exist on Earth. But there are two other factors influencing our vineyard right now. 2. First, the power of an elf. There was a time when an elf was nearby. The reason you were able to eat those delicious grapes was because of our elven senior hero, Arian Ruparte. So the elf's power still remains in the vineyard? Yeah, and the second one is. Then, they arrived at the end of the passageway. He'd already exterminated all the insect-type monsters that had crawled into the passageway before. Shin Woo checked to make sure, nodded his head, and at the end of the passageway, released the lock that he had set up. Once he did that, the vineyard was revealed, as well as. What is it? Who is it? Paul Zero? It's Paul Zero. Paul Zero. Did the Century's superstar arrive or something? Kracia looked puzzled and looked around, but she soon received confirmation of the identity of that superstar. More than 300 dryads lunged for Shin Woo altogether. At the beginning, Kracia thought it was an attack and prepared to cast her magic, but she soon realized that that was unnecessary. What took you so long? Paul Zero, your elemental power has gotten even stronger. Everyone, look, Paul Zero is using the darkness element. As I thought, you really are an elementalist. It really is true, you've become even cooler. Your head looks even smoother than before. Look here, squeak, squeak, that's probably just you misunderstood. Paul Zero, Master, shall I attack? No, please hold back. Soon, Shin Woo's body was buried underneath the dryads and he could no longer be seen. What was so good about this skeleton that caused them to shriek and latch onto him? Kracia, who stood beside Jin and had become a third wheel, froze at the overwhelming sight, but then asked Jin a question, who wore a tired expression and looked familiar with the situation. What are these guys? Dryads. Shin Woo, Paul Zero's diehard fans. Kracia's eyes narrowed even further. Jin sighed and whispered to her, giving her a rough explanation of what had happened. While they were doing that, Shin Woo had finally gotten out of the aggressive welcoming, and was able to speak with the Dryad princess, Sinia. She nodded her head and listened as he spoke to her about Kracia, who he said was a trustworthy ally, as well as the real reason he had come to the vineyard, grape harvesting. Paul Zero, you can take as many grapes as you want. We've had a huge effect on the grapevines, as we've been showering them with affection. Thanks. Then I'll take a look at them first. Shin Woo followed Sinia's hand gesture, stretched one of the grapevines, and grabbed a bunch of grapes. They were much livelier than the ones he had harvested with Arian a few months ago. It's almost like the grapes are shining. With the power of an elf and the dryads, as well as the magic facilities that maintain the vineyard, it had resulted in a masterpiece. He would need to check later if he could use these to create great wine, but at the very least, he was sure that these grapes were of greater quality than any normal grapes and would be hard to find anywhere. Shin, Paul Zero, this is just a basic question, but what'll you do by making wine? You can't even drink it. As expected, Kracia asked the straightforward question. Shin Woo calmly acknowledged her without looking the least bit hurt. Although he regretted not being able to eat or drink, he wasn't stupid enough to take it out on a person who had nothing to do with it. But I can sell it. What are you? At an extremely high price too. So, how could I not try to make my own wine? Would you like to try some grapes? I've already eaten plenty because of you, but, yeah, I'll try some. Shin Woo gave Kracia some grapes as his jawbone clattered. She carefully plucked a grape and placed it into her mouth, and at that moment her eyes shined in an all-natural color. The only thing he could tell was that it was incredibly delicious. But that wasn't all. It's abundant in magic. I'm sure. You can use it as a material for potions. Really? Really? But unfortunately, Kracia didn't know how to make mana potions. From the start, he had only one course of action available to him. Everyone, please harvest the grapes. I understand. In the time that he hadn't seen her, the Dryad princess, Sinia, had become much firmer. Once she gave the order, the dryads moved in perfect order and collected the grapes. Seeing that, Shin Woo realized that all those grapes wouldn't fit in the winery, even if he used all of the free space. As I thought, we have to expand. Paul Zero, is there anything else we can help you with? Not yet. I'll tell you later when I need your help. Okay, until then. You still have the twig I gave you, right? It felt weird looking straight at the Dryad princess, Sinia, as it felt as though his every thought was right out in the open. He knew her feelings were pure, so it felt even more awkward than when he had met with God, who he and his fellow heroes were affiliated with. Shin Woo tried his very best to not look her straight in the eye, and nodded his head. I'll be in the area for a while. You see, I plan on making wine. Then we'll be able to see each other often. Cinia laughed softly, as though she knew everything Shin Woo was thinking, and kissed his cheekbone. Seeing that, Kracia flushed and lightly applauded. The romance between a skeleton and a spirit. How romantic. Ow, stop spouting such crap. While Kracia and Jin quarreled over something trivial again, the other dryads began to shower Shin Woo with kisses, as if they were saying that they wouldn't lose to Cinia. Even though he told them that he would be in the area, and that they would see each other often, it was no use. They were extremely faithful to their instincts. Glittery, squeaky, Paul Zero, don't go and play with us. Let's stay here together. Master, shall I attack? I told you to hold back. It took Shin Woo 4 minutes before he could escape the dryads. But by the time he'd escaped, Kracia and Jin had disappeared. Were they jealous? Shin Woo reminded himself to ask the dryads to be affectionate with Jin later as well, and followed after them. Master, behind you. Hey, don't follow me. Yugook. 3 days later, Shin Woo had finished with expanding the winery, and could begin manufacturing. In order for Shin Woo to set up golem manufacturing equipment, he first needed to poke a hole through the passageway that was connected with the winery. Just in case, he strengthened the passageway's foundation so that it wouldn't collapse. He then placed a sturdy pillar in the center, allowing him to expand the corridor. It wasn't as easy as it sounded to make more space in a dungeon, but Shin Woo and Jin were assisted by Kracia, a level 7 magician, so it actually wasn't that difficult either. Moreover, I just need to make it here, right? Yeah, thanks. First I'll toss it. Alright, grow? Because the dryads realized that Shin Woo was doing something underground, they kept coming out of the vineyard and meeting with him. Since they were there, he asked them to help out with the construction. They were surprisingly helpful. He used their power to cut off a branch of the grapevine, plant it, and make it grow, causing it to support the ceiling whilst supporting the ground as well. It was extremely durable and reduced the construction time significantly. In fact, it was so tough that he couldn't believe it came from a grapevine. Dryads, as I thought, they're amazing. Compliment us more. The environment down here was much too different from that of the surface. Technology was much less efficient than magic. Shin Woo cheered at the reduced estimated construction time. As long as he came up with a proper design, it seemed like he would be able to expand the dungeon about 10 times more without worrying about collapse. However, he didn't have any plans on expanding the dungeon that much as of yet, so he stopped at a suitable point. There's a lot of space left over, even if we put in the golem equipment. Yeah, there's a lot of space remaining. Then, how about a bedroom for me? Shin Woo wanted to snort at her wishful thinking, but unfortunately, he didn't have a nose to do so. Seeing how hard she was trying to get her own room, Shin Woo could only shrug. I'm thinking of making the remaining space into a waiting room for my subordinates. Of course, I told them to roam around the Empire and hunt undead, but we need a place for them to store the loot they pick up on the way, as well as a place to meet for emergencies. When they do gather, and the other heroes accidentally find this place, I wonder what they'll think. If the other heroes were to see this mixed force of skeleton golems, chimeras, and dryads, they might assume that they are the Undead Empire's secret task force and may make a huge fuss over it. Alright, this way. The wires will go through the walls. This is heavy. Is the device broken? I'm going to kick it softly. Hey, don't. After Shin Woo had finished setting up the equipment and tested them, he had brought the equipment that could manufacture golem cores, but he didn't have the resources to use it right now, so he would have to leave it alone for a while. He worked on the entire area's security, so 3 days just flew by. Is that it? Nice, we're right on time. What do you mean? Shin Woo took a look around the facility and muttered in satisfaction. Seeing that, Kracia tilted her head. He grinned and led his party outside towards an empty area outside of the winery. A ferocious wind was blowing. Where did this wind come from, and where did it go? Kracia thought absent-mindedly, but then just tilted her head. She saw something that she hadn't seen before the winds had started blowing. Is that? No way. You're right. I told you I'd use it as a waiting room. Shin Woo lightly nodded his head. He spent 3 days organizing the facility, but at the same time, he was waiting for them. So, who were they? They were, Captain, we've come. We've gathered just like you asked. Complying with Steelworkers' call, the Pauls and the Golems who were spread out through the Empire's outskirts. Aside from the Kai Pauls, who he'd just sent away, all of his forces had gathered here. Aside from occasionally calling a portion of these guys and reinforcing them, they'd never fully gathered before. Wow, Kracia just laughed at the sight of a force exceeding 1,000 at the very least. Of course, the limited order bone core that Shin Woo had let her borrow allowed her control golems, but she couldn't even imagine that it would lead to something like this. Sir Zero Paul, it's been a while. Yeah, it has. Thanks for coming. The undead Avenger, Shino Rendu, was there as well. He'd made him the commander-in-chief of more than 800 Pauls, and Shino Rendu had taken the elite Pauls who were close to level 5 with him and hunted in the danger zones. Though his strongest subordinate was technically the level 7 Chimera Avenger, Kai Paul, Shino Rendu possessed an ability that quite closely resembled his authority as a hero, so it would be laughable to say that one was stronger than the other. But is that girl next to you I met her by chance. She's a hero. Since she's not as rigid as the other heroes and I could actually talk to her, we've decided to cooperate. As I thought, you truly are amazing, Sir Paul Zero. Did you meet any other heroes? I couldn't even think of myself doing so, since Shin Woo had given him that command. However, even if Shin Woo hadn't given that command, Shino Rendu wouldn't have attempted to make contact with another hero. Because he, as a hero in the past, knew exactly how heroes reacted to the sight of an undead. Not all heroes are like her. Try to avoid other heroes from now on if you can. I understand. Hi, Shin Woo said, and then Kracia greeted Shino Rendu, who was nodding, with a clear voice. It seemed like he had flinched for a moment, but he soon nodded his head and greeted her back. I'm an undead Avenger. Yeah, you're that magician from back then. I'm awed by your open mindset of working together with humans, Captain. Yeah, just follow me. Around the time the past hero and the current hero finished exchanging pleasantries, the other Pauls cut in and began praising Shin Woo. Because he was already used to this, Shin Woo just nonchalantly ignored it and led them all to their new meeting place. In the process, he taught the team leaders or hire the magic password necessary to enter. It was hard figuring out something from nothing, but memorizing a magic pattern wasn't hard, so they were able to memorize it without much difficulty. This is your meeting place from now on. If I call, you just need to gather here. Also, all the loot you gather from around the Empire should be stored in the storehouse here. I understand. Ooh, it's a truly secretive facility. After gathering all of his subordinates, Shin Woo's first agenda was using bone reinforcement on the Pauls. With the bones that they and the golems had gathered thus far. Of course, level 1 or 2 bones were pretty insignificant, so he gathered them separately. He was planning on using these bones as consumables for the gate that would transport him to other places. Ooh, Sir Paul Zero. Because of you, I feel my bones becoming tougher. The acid within me is becoming stronger. In the process, the Pauls grew to level 4 elites, and dozens of Pauls starting from Paul 41 became level 5 elites. The Pauls who were once Doom Factors gained a new, cool name, Doom Soldier. Even so, their growth is way too fast. Isn't it because you awakened your Darkness Element's mana? The Darkness Element's mana had an effect that strengthened one's ties with the contracted target. Thus, it was safe to assume that his Darkness mana had a positive effect on them, who were contracted with him through a master and servant relationship. Moreover, his use of bone reinforcement on them was like a type of baptism. He was sure that the Darkness Element strengthened the effect of bone reinforcement. After he pushed the joyous Pauls to one side, he called over the next hitter up to bat. Now, next up are the golems. I understand, Steelworker. Let's start. I understand, Master. Contrary to the Pauls or the Kai Pauls who completely recognized Shin Woo as their superior, the golems only followed him because he possessed the Steelworker seal. If another Steelworker were to appear, then he would have to terminate them. That's why he had been ignoring them so that he wouldn't catch their attention. But now, the situation's different. Which had been infused with Shin Woo's darkness mana, flew between the lined-up golems and spread the mana. Its ability, Mana Parasite was an absolute ability that was effective so long as its target was a golem, but because these golems obeyed Shin Woo's commands, it didn't take much of his mana. With just a small spray of mana. Bug modification complete. It's a pleasure, Master. I await your orders, Master. Scrapping Steelworkers Authority. Modifying program. Hundreds of level 4 bronze golems, as well as the dozens of level 5 iron golems, recognized Shin Woo as their sole master instantaneously. With this, even if they were to meet Steelworker later, or were destroyed, they would never obey Steelworker again. Nice. Since we're scrapping the unnecessary code, they should be able to disperse their magic and ultimately increase their average amount of magic. These guys can't even level up, so I have to at least strengthen them like this. You do such ridiculous things as if it were nothing. Unfortunately, he couldn't expect regular golems to grow. They were puppets that followed inputted orders and acted accordingly, and they weren't autonomous. That was one of the reasons that the Emperor wanted to implant Night Souls into the golems. Golems don't accumulate karma, thus, one couldn't expect them to change. But in return, when they hunt, they gain a large amount of perium. It's as if the karma that should have gone to them is turned into perium instead. But will it still be like that in the future? What? These golems, can they really not grow? That's one of the prerequisites to a golem. They obviously shouldn't be able to, right? Kracia didn't immediately reply to Shin Woo, and she just gazed at the cuckoo golem, Rem, which had finished its mission and had returned to Shin Woo's shoulder. Rem, as if knowing that she was staring at it, tilted its head, its appearance like bonecraftwork. It awakened a skill it didn't have before, so I thought maybe they could grow too. Huh? Shin Woo thought what she said wasn't entirely wrong, and observed Rem, but like with Kracia, it just tilted its head. Now that he thought about it, he definitely remembered seeing a message saying that the Mana Parasite ability would grow. I just have to wait and see, I guess. If it was the involvement of the darkness element's mana that brought about the change, then he would be able to figure it out immediately. Shin Woo thought that would be entertaining and clapped. Then shall we start in earnest? Finally, Kracia's eyes shined. Shin Woo vigorously gave out commands. Pauls, you guys have to find an underground mine. Silver or gold is best. I understand, a gemstone mine is fine too. In any case, you need to find a mine with metal that can contain a large quantity of magic. For the time being, you guys won't be fighting, and your main priority should be searching. I'll keep that in mind. The Pauls responded vigorously, and they soon departed, but contrary to Shin Woo, who looked at them imposingly, Jin and Kracia looked on vacantly. They were expressions that seemed to indicate that they couldn't understand why he gave them that order. Shin Woo shrugged his shoulders and explained. Did you really think we'd be able to make golems right away? We can't make them with just the cores. We obviously need the metal that makes up their bodies. How can you not make them with the materials you have on hand? Shin Woo knew exactly what Kracia was talking about. She wanted him to make golems with bone. Of course, Shin Woo knew that it would eventually come to this. And thus, I have to use the high-leveled bones to strengthen the Pauls. So, I'll change metal or gems into bone and create bones that way. The right man for the right job. He didn't know if using high-leveled monster bones would be beneficial in the construction of golems, but to be blunt, it was a huge waste of resources. One golem would require hundreds or even thousands of bones to create, so using those high-leveled bones on the Pauls would be much more effective in comparison. However, what if he were to transform the gemstones or the ore? They were inefficient to use on skeletons, but they should be effective in the creation of golems. I'll definitely be able to create golems that won't lose out to the ones Arama Steelworker has. Then, what are you going to do while the Pauls are looking for a mine? Kracia, who thought they'd be able to manufacture golems once the facility was complete, was disappointed and asked. Shin Woo grinned and turned around. It was there, the Kerr Century Winery's equipment that was used for the best wine in the Empire. We have to make wine with our obedient golem friends. Kracia wanted to back out, but she realized that Shin Woo's cooperative contract forbade her from leaving whenever she wanted, and bitterly hit the ground. That was the moment that the newbie hero, Kracia, had realized that she couldn't recklessly sign a contract. Because of Shin Woo's job on Earth, he had quite the diverse skill set, and his competence was praised by those around him. But even so, that didn't go into producing wine. The reason he even attempted to make wine was because the winery kept the technician's records. And in addition, there was someone he could trust. Hello, Plane. I'm here. Guten Morgen. Oh my, now that I think about it, it hasn't been that long since we last met, Mr. Lee Shin Woo. Plane greeted him enthusiastically, waved her hand at him, stopped, and tilted her head. Soon, her eyes moved in a crescent motion. She was laughing with a satisfied expression, so she was definitely thinking about something weird. Did you make some money in that short period of time? No, there's no way you did. No matter how badly you want to see me, you can't waste your permits to the secret shop. Didn't I tell you that each and every permit was like a portion of God's grace? I have a lot of money, though. You don't need to try so hard to lie. Lee Shin Woo said calmly, and his lips curled upwards. At some point, Plane, who had been probing him, blinked quickly. Was she trying to brag about her eyelashes? Of course, it didn't have much of an effect on Lee Shin Woo. Then, her eyes shined. She let go of her chin, and asked seriously. This would be unbelievable, but the one who defeated one of the 12 generals. Oh, that was me. Oh, God? It had been a long time since Plane had looked to God for help, as it seemed like she didn't even really like God that much. She should have heard about the general's death from God herself, so it seemed like she just didn't know who had killed him. I believe that your growth is incredibly fast, and that you have abilities much greater than your level might imply, but to think you already defeated a general. What are the other heroes doing? I'd like to ask the same thing. Lee Shin Woo sighed and replied, but recognized that it was tough to expect the same things from the other heroes. He utilized his karma's unique properties to infiltrate the city, borrow the strength of several undead, and had even manipulated the treasure eater, which had come at an opportune time, to defeat Hansen. That's good news. You see, I heard that someone had killed a general, but I didn't know who exactly did it or how. To think that you were the one who killed him. You're free, right? Please tell me all the details. If you want to hear about it, then you need to help me. You see, I have something I really want. Alright, so hurry up and tell me all about it. It might have been the vibe, but Plane seemed a bit rushed. Lee Shin Woo tilted his head, picked out the core details, and told her about what happened. She looked intrigued at around the midway point. Hansen von Dorth, I see, he is indeed someone that you could face. Most were reluctant to face him one-on-one, but you possessed a similar ability to him, Mr. Shin Woo. To be honest, certain parts of his ability were strange. At that final moment of their one-on-one fight, and then experiencing those dense memories by absorbing his bone. At the time, Lee Shin Woo felt that his swordsmanship was a bit familiar. He wasn't just talking about Hansen's ability to use lightning. Though Hansen had been debuffed, he had been able to predict his sword's course and the power behind it, so it wasn't very difficult for him to dodge. In other words, that meant, you're right, God created bursting thunder by gathering several skills. The Lightning Shadow General's swordsmanship is also in there. As I thought, now he understood why he could absorb so many of Hansen's memories. It was because he already knew swordsmanship that was closely related to Hansen's. He had solved the puzzle, so he sported a refreshed expression, but was faced with a truly mysterious expression. He didn't know whether Plane was looking at him in wonder, or if she was relieved. I can understand why God was so excited now. I thought you'd die several times against a general and would have to aim for their weak spot to win. Of course, that in and of itself is plenty amazing, but God raising the maximum level of invisible heart was to take that into account. To think that he would take down a general without losing a single life. Rather than using any lives, he just increased his maximum lives with invisible heart. Moreover, whenever he defeated an undead hero and put them to rest, the maximum level of invisible heart would increase, so it wouldn't be impossible for the maximum level of invisible heart to continue to increase. What's the point in even stockpiling them? Please just save them. They'll be really helpful later when you're faced with a lot of danger. And if he managed to save them to the very end, Lee Shin Woo let it go, shrugged his shoulder, and discarded such thoughts. His abilities were still lacking, and the chance of that was quite slim. In any case, my goal is to have a quiet and peaceful life no matter what it takes. How can a level 6 hero who took down a general say that? Any hero passing by would laugh at that. Of course they would. They would say, what kind of hero is that? In the process of defeating Hansen, Lee Shin Woo realized that his actions and his plans weren't all that praiseworthy. Of course, he didn't feel anything like embarrassment, and although he never really cared about other people's opinions and was satisfied with the Joker karma. But you know, you're probably the most hero-like out of all the heroes I've seen. That's quite surprising. Did you actually hear my explanation? Plain spoke with such a serious expression, so it became a bit embarrassing for him. Because it was embarrassing, he decided to just accept the compliment and move on, but Plain added more. Since you can't hide your good-heartedness, no matter how cynical you may act. I really hate human drama. That's quite a coincidence. I really hate human dramas as well. However, Plain smiled mischievously. My friend once told me, there is not one person loved by spirits who is a bad person. You're completely covered in the marks of the dryads, so I guess that's not really persuasive. As expected, this misunderstanding was because of the dryads. He needed to explain how he got involved with the dryads, but that would just prove that he was rotten to the core, so it felt kind of weird. However, he then thought back to Sinia's pure gaze and felt that it was complicated, so he decided to just let it go. Just sell me some stuff. Ah, how embarrassing. I want the bone of a wine manufacturer. Please cooperate like you promised. A wine manufacturer, Plain, whose head had been filled with ways of teasing Shin Woo, changed immediately. She pushed her body across the counter in an instant and tightly grabbed Shin Woo's bony hand. Are you going to create a winery? Ah, now that I think about it, you told me that you cleared out an entire winery. There's a vineyard that's still alive. Are the winery's facilities still intact? Correct answer. But you usually wouldn't even think to create wine from there again. I have some manpower. Kerr Century's wine. They're renowned for their extremely sweet and delicious wine that's created through their special ripening process. Ripening them for dozens of years may be impossible, but if you continue to go in that direction. No, I have to find that bone no matter what, no matter what. Plain seemed to talk a lot more than usual, and eventually, she was lost in her own little world. However, when Shin Woo engaged her in conversation, Plain stood up suddenly and yelled. I'll find it no matter what. Ooh, I'll give you some books on wine, so please read those while you're waiting. You know how important theory is. Ah, I understand. Shin Woo, who was frightened by Plain's sudden drive, meekly sat down and perused the books she'd given him. Before he could work on replicating Kerr Century Winery's technique, he needed to have a basic understanding of wine, so these books, which laid out the basics for him, were incredibly helpful. He quickly read through a few volumes, and when he thought about buying these books and going home, he raised his head. I found it. Plain's eyes glimmered, and stuck out a few bones towards him. There were 2 level 1 bones, 1 level 2 bone, and surprisingly, 1 level 4 elite bone. Fortunately, I had these in storage. Why are you so surprised? The reason for the Kerr Century Winery's groundbreaking technique and security was because it was protected by a renowned family of magicians for generations. I see. Thank you. So how much is it? 30,000 perium. No matter how he thought about it, that was a really low price for a bundle including a level 4 elite bone. However, Shin Woo just decided to pay at her asking price. Absorbing ALV4 skeleton wizard's skull through bone reinforcement. Absorbing a significant amount of memories and experiences. This facility is alive. That is how we made it. In order for it to be in the optimum environment for fermentation and maturation, unknown magic master craftsman. Plain, who had been watching him, snorted once he was done absorbing the bones, and asked. How is it? Do you know how to do it? No, the information is too complex, so. It seems like I'll have to learn by doing. Do your best. The revival of the Kerr Century Winery lies in your hands, Mr. Shin Woo. Plain grabbed onto his hands tightly and yelled desperately. It seemed as though she thought the Kerr Century Winery was more important than killing a general. Shin Woo just responded with a smile. Please let go, so I can go and try. Once Shin Woo had left the shop, amongst all those waiting for him, a dryads reacted first. It was one of the dryads that really liked and followed Shin Woo. I smell another woman's scent on you, Paul Zero. You know you can't do that, is third on my personal ranking of lines I want to hear a woman say at least once in my life, so thanks. What are you always doing over there that makes you come back so late? That woman seemed quite unpleasant. They kept showering him with complaints, and once Shin Woo checked the time, he realized that 4 hours had already passed. He told them about what he'd talked about with Plain, and explained that he'd come back late because he had to wait for her to find the bones. You may understand if you watch what I'm about to do. Could you call a few dryads over? I feel like I'll need your help to make wine. Of course. Just wait sec. I'll bring some. The dryad rushed over to the vineyard. Shin Woo gathered all of the golems, took out a large container, and poured all the grapes out. Alright, then shall we start with mashing the grapes? In order to create this year's Century Nouveau. You just said nouveau, right? That's French. Shin Woo completely ignored Jin's retort, and started mashing the grapes. The level 4 golems followed his lead and began moving diligently. The bronze golems and up had the basic ability of synchronizing with each other. The fact that you're using this many golems to do this is... Shin Woo, you're always so surprising and exhilarating. That's not enough. Watch, and follow me more closely. Shin Woo was saying something strange again, but Jin and Kratia, who were both used to his eccentricity, didn't say anything in response. No matter what they said, the golems would just continue to mash the grapes. The Pauls were searching the empire for a mine, and Shin Woo and the golems were making wine. Work was in full swing. Shin Woo mashed grapes with its skin and seeds, and placed the gruesome-looking contents safely into an oak barrel and then placed the stopper into it. After that, he sighed and declared that their work was done. That was their last oak barrel just now. We don't need to worry about these for about 2 days. Bring all of them to the fermenting room. I understand. The hundreds of golems moved the oak barrels to the fermenting room one by one. Due to the magical equipment set up by the winemakers, the temperature was thoroughly regulated 24 hours every day, all year around. Thus, it was one of the 2 facilities that served as the core of the winery. The other was obviously the ripening room, which was used after the fermentation process was complete. The other processes are helpful, but if I master how to ripen and bottle the wine, I can just keep a few golems here to make sure everything goes smoothly. That'd be a real wine factory. At the very least, the golems possessed a good grasp on how to copy a human's movements. Moreover, they were strong and possessed infinite stamina, so only a few golems had been needed to manage this huge winery. Moreover, so long as he had the dryad's aid, he had an infinite supply of grapes, and he could keep the winery's equipment semi-permanently active. Let's say that we can sell that wine at a good price. What are you going to do with that money? Are you going to buy the secret shop? You bring up a good point. To be honest, there wasn't really much for Shin Woo to buy in the secret shop. Skill books were so popular that whenever they came in they were immediately sold, and he didn't need food from the very beginning. Bones. They might work on the Pauls, but Shin Woo and Jin had grown too much to develop further through the secret shop's bones. Then equipment? Unfortunately, Shin Woo had already absorbed a variety of level 2, 3, and even level 4 equipment. Of course, when he absorbs a new and unique piece of equipment, he does gain some stats, but the more those types or characteristics overlap, the less he gains from them, so even they were limited. What about finding a way to use Parium independently? Unfortunately, Shin Woo's abilities were still lacking for him to do so. Shin Woo had already made up his mind from the start. I'm planning on buying materials for golem cores. Since I want to start that properly first. It'd probably be a good idea to buy other materials that make up a golem's body. Though it would be best if the Pauls find a mine, a wine factory and a golem factory. It was the collaboration of the century. If he were to successfully create wine and sell it, and obtain golem cores and create golems, what would be the result? Even the very thought of it was scary, so he decided not to think about it. Kratia, let's begin in earnest. I've been waiting for you to say that. Because he was fermenting the grapes, Shin Woo used the remaining time to study golems with Kratia. They read all of the books that they took from the secret facility, and remodeling the techniques that were out of their reach was their first priority. Next, Shin more thoroughly analyzed his transformed bone core, and would adjust it to design golems. He decided to form a broad plan that could respond regardless of what material was used for the golems. In the end, you're going to make them with all bones, right? The materials have the same core properties, so it shouldn't be very hard. Let's assume I turn them all into bone. It feels like we won't need this part. But I feel like this joint region should be reinforced. How about making specialized armaments that are split into various patterns, depending on the characteristics of the transformed bone? Ah, that sounds good. Cool. Jin felt alienated as their uninterruptible conversation progressed. He saw Kracia's face, who was excitedly chatting with Shin Woo, and he felt a feeling that was difficult to describe. But if you do that, then the movement formula over here is... Jin, I'm going to go for a walk. Jin remained still, and thought he might end up venting his anger on Shin Woo again, even though he was innocent, and went outside. Contrary to the inside of the dungeon, which overflowed with life energy, the outside was still filled with a bleak and heavy air. The curse that permeated the empire. Though the mana and essence Shin Woo had gained was similar to it, it had manifested in a completely different form, and Jin absorbed it. Shin Woo had taught him the know-how, so if he wanted, he could absorb the curse 4 to 5 times faster than before. The curse's mana rushed towards his body, and during the duration of the absorption, he felt refreshed. Because of that, he could get a hold of himself. Seriously, what the hell am I doing? He remembered how much he'd overreacted when he saw his partner interact with someone else and sighed. No matter how preposterous Shin Woo's actions or words were, he was only focused on becoming stronger. That was the whole point of making wine as well as creating golems. And he didn't really think about his relations with the dryads, Kracia, or the shopkeeper, Plain. That's because he was nothing more than a bony skeleton. Thinking about it doesn't help me at all. I have to work harder. He'd pledged several times that he wouldn't slow Shin Woo down, yet whenever he seemed to catch up, Shin Woo would already be a step ahead, which made his efforts seem laughable. However, he couldn't allow that to happen anymore. They'd already taken down one of the 12 generals. All he'd done to contribute in that battle was allow Kracia and Shin Woo to ride on his back and run. Shin Woo told him that that was plenty, but Jin couldn't accept that. If he was just going to run fast, then he wouldn't be any different from his past life. He wanted to be a bit more helpful to his partner. If you've decided to give it everything you've got to keep up with him, then this ability will surely shine brighter. I'll make it an ability for you alone. Then, Jin remembered what God had told him. When Shin Woo had acquired a new element from God, Jin obviously gained a new ability from her as well. He'd wanted a powerful ability that would be effective against the powerful opponents Shin Woo faced, and God refined his skill. That was Jin's first high-rank skill. Good, let's surprise him. He grinded his teeth and began to run. Because Shin Woo was busy with his manufacturing, Jin decided to use his free time to practice this skill so that he could use it freely in battle. High-rank Magic Breath LV1. You draw magic to your body, change it into destructive energy, and shoot it in a straight line. It can contain the power of an element, and if it does, the destructive force increases. The skill was one of the 2 skills he'd gained from the Treasure Eater's jawbone. The other skill was LV1 high-rank lightning resistance, and God had reinforced it with her power. Because the skill was originally only usable by those who could wield lightning, it was completely useless to Jin at first. God had processed it so that Jin could use it. It's funny, an undead breathing. But alright, I'm gathering it. Hawak, Kuhik. Once Jin had gathered enough mana, he opened his mouth and spewed the energy. A highly compressed, soft blue mana laser was shot out in a straight line. After he emptied about half his energy, an undead panther roaming around the plains was completely melted away, creating a giant hole in the ground. It's pretty weak for a high-rank skill. It's like I'm firing a blank. He could use the skill like this, but the skill could only unleash its full power by using it in tandem with an element. Jin couldn't use the elements, but if Shin Woo were to help him a little, he would be able to contain acid, fire, ice, lightning, everything. It would be completely useless without Shin Woo. Jin was finally able to gain a skill like this. He'd grown significantly since he had first been dropped into the Empire, just running in order to escape reality. Alright, let's make sure I got it down and then go. Jin steeled himself and began to move. First, he needed to be able to freely control the output of magic breath, and then, he needed to be able to use it whilst sprinting, or at least several times in battle. He considered every application of the skill and went through intense training. If it were Shin Woo, he wouldn't allow it to feel unnatural. Shin Woo was both hot-blooded and calm during combat. How could he contribute in a way that removed all the variables and achieved victory? Jin kept those in mind and moved his body around, losing track of time. 3 weeks had passed in no time, and then, Shin Woo contacted him. Shin Woo. We're about to make history here, where are you? It's my fault, so come back. Make history? Are you finally making a golem? Shin Woo. No, the wine's done. This guy, he's definitely making wine to get stronger, right? Now that he thought about it, Jin remembered that this was just the type of guy Shin Woo was, sighed, and returned to the winery. Jin, who had run everywhere and practiced his skill, had even gone through a level 3 danger zone. When Shin Woo wasn't riding him, he could run at a speed akin to light, so he was able to return in just a few hours. You're not late. What about the golems? We finished adjusting the basic equipment just yesterday, but the Pauls haven't come back yet. Recreating the technique of making golems, considered the most difficult field in magic engineering, in a few weeks was quite impressive, but Jin didn't really understand any of it and just nodded his head. Then let's put the wine into the bottles I bought from the secret shop. As you command, master. His assistants, no, the golems followed Shin Woo's demonstration and busily moved around, bottling the wine which had finished ripening. Shin Woo raised the first completed wine bottle and checked its information. Kerr Century Elemental 451. This wine was created by Kerr Century Winery's successor, with grapes that thrived with the love and affection of the spirits and an elf. It's still somewhat lacking in terms of technique, but the raw materials, which are extremely difficult to obtain, emit a rich smell and have the right acidity to mask that flaw. It is a masterpiece that shows the quality of the ingredients. Even after it was bottled, the magic within the materials causes the wine to ripen gradually, so the longer you leave it, the more valuable it becomes. Huh? Did you fail? No, that's not it. Shin Woo had put his heart and soul into the gathering and juice extraction, and then the fermentation and the ripening, so there was no way he could have failed. He saw the quality of the grapes and they would make a great nouveau, so that's what he made, yet, the completed product wasn't a nouveau. Is it because they're grapes affected by the dryads? But it just means that you can sell them for more, right? Yeah, you can say that. He was still tilting his head, but he decided to let it go as it had turned out well. No, before that, Kracia, I'm counting on you to try it. It's an honor. Kracia, looking slightly anxious, held out her wineglass, and Shin Woo poured the wine. She took a sip of the wine, and Shin Woo, Jin, the dryads, and the golems all focused their attention onto her. How is it? If it sucks, you can spit it out. I want to try it too. Good. A brief moment passed, and Kracia, who'd swallowed down the wine, quietly gave him a thumbs up. Then, she carefully pushed her glass forward once more, so it seemed like she really liked the wine. Through the power of the spirits, the Kerr Century Winery had returned. He was able to earnestly start making golems around the time he finished making the wine. His elite troops, led by Shino Rendu, had found an abandoned emerald mine. Shin Woo couldn't help but be excited. There was nothing more I could hope for if it were silver or gold, but to think they would find an emerald mine. In this world, gems can generally store a large amount of mana, and was much easier to infuse mana into compared to regular metal. That was the reason most magical devices were created out of gemstones. Of course, because gems were so valuable, Shin Woo had previously thought that finding a mine with enough gems would be impossible, yet. We found a mine shaft, but it feels like it hasn't been long since it was mined. I believe it should yield enough for you to build hundreds of golems. Alright, just start collecting. Shin Woo led the Pauls and the golems, finished with making wine, towards the emerald mine. Who could stop them, when his troops were at least level 4 elites? They pushed ahead and went into the mine immediately. It seemed like there were monsters that were inside originally, but Shino Rendu and his group had killed them all without a trace. They're not at the entrance. If you come in a bit more, then you'll see something like this. The gemstone, radiating a green light, was the size of Shino Rendu's fist. If he cut it a bit, then it would probably emit an even prettier light, but it wasn't like he was going to sell it, and their ultimate goal was golem production. He planned on getting rid of any unnecessary steps. But it seems like there's a small problem. Do you see the thick curse energy that has gathered inside? Ah, you're right. Mines weren't dungeons, which meant that they were continuously exposed to the curse. As emeralds absorbed any sort of mana, none of them had become weak or broken apart. However, they were filled to the brim with the curse's energy. Emerald gemstone. A gemstone capable of containing a large amount of mana, as well as distributing it. But because it was exposed to the curse for hundreds of years, it is filled to the brim with the curse, and will not be easy to process. It's not really such a big deal. It might take a while, but I just need to absorb it all. Above all, I've become able to use the darkness element, so... He had definitely forgotten what his ability was for a moment. By the time Shin Woo realized that, the emerald was already changing, in other words, it was ossifying. But that process was quite dramatic. The curse within began to resist, but it soon seemed to realize that it was an unwinnable battle, and all at once, became pure darkness energy. Magic spread throughout the ossifying gemstone, and radiated a calm, dark green light. It was an incredibly capricious and charming light. Dark emerald bone. A bone created by compressing the gemstone's essence. It is charged with a powerful darkness energy, and is now unmatched in terms of hardness and magic. Oh, I don't know what really happened, but it seems like you've taken care of it. You're always like this. Kracia, as though she had already expected this to happen, was given the dark emerald bone. Though it was smaller than the original gemstone, its hardness and magic were much, much higher, so it had become a different class of material altogether. It's probably because this gemstone previously contained the curse's magic as well. Yeah, it seems like it responded to my darkness element, and the curse energy changed into pure darkness. The darkness element, I see, that's the reason you were able to fight against the curse that's covering the empire. It seemed like Shino Rendu, who was listening to their conversation, was having a huge misunderstanding, but since it didn't matter what he thought, Shin Woo just let it go. Then, shall we begin mining? Everyone's ready, right? Of course. We're ready whenever. Good. Start. And so, 800 pals and 400 golems began the extensive mining. There was no way the mining wouldn't progress quickly, as there were 1,200 of them that were at least level 4, rather than being level 1 miners. Even if the mine shaft collapsed while they were at it, they would be able to get out unscathed due to their strong bodies, so there was no need to progress safely. What do we do in the meantime? Should we help with the mining too? We've never been here before, so let's explore and clear any nearby dungeons we find. If there's a city nearby, it'll become a pain in the ass, so we'll look into that as well. Okay, Shin Woo's party left the mine and began exploring. Fortunately, there wasn't a city in the vicinity, and he thought that that might have been the reason that this emerald mine hadn't been properly developed. It's an empty area. We were lucky. The closest satellite city is an hour away with Jin's speed. Then, for the time being, we won't be getting into any fights. Because there wasn't a city nearby, there was a high chance that there weren't any other heroes in this area either. However, as if waiting for him to say that, Rem, which was on top of Shin Woo's shoulder, suddenly shook. Master, I sense golems. You're not talking about the ones mining, right? No, I sense golems that are under Stake Steelworkers' control. What a delicious sounding name. 1. The movement of golems under one of the 4 commanders' control. Why were they here? Shin Woo thought that their objective might be the same as his. They were looking for gems so that they could make new golems. Fortunately, Shin Woo's party had made the first move, but if they had encountered the golems on the way, it would have become a bit troublesome. They definitely don't know about how I cleared out the hidden facility and destroyed it. If not, then they might have sent a collection team over there, and simultaneously, sent golems over here as well. He did several things that hurt them, but there was no way he could just let them go. Stake Steelworker? Has he shown up personally? No. 20 level 6 elite golems are moving secretly in a group. If you say so. He didn't need to think about it anymore. Shin Woo raised his hand and removed his equipment, starting from the helmet all the way down to his boots. Then, his armor turned blue, and he held the bifurcated spine whip, so he didn't look anything like his pre-existing image. Rem, you go first. We've found some rare specimen, so there's no way we can kill them. I understand. Arama Steelworkers' Golden Army usually moved stealthily. The reason Shin Woo was even able to notice them in advance was because he had Rem, who possessed a specialized ability for sensing their presence. I think this is the first time I've seen his level 6 golems act. That's just how cautious Arama Steelworker was. That meant that this mission was important enough for someone as cautious as him to mobilize his golems, But why did they have to run into Shin Woo? Perhaps Arama Steelworker was giving him a freebie. There's nothing more I can ask for if I can study a level 6 golem personally before making them. Want help? No, I'm good. Though it hadn't been very long since he'd turned level 6, because he'd achieved so many feats. Shin Woo's stats were greater than 4,800. Plus, when he took into account his rebellion skill, which passively increased his stats, no level 6 would be able to threaten him. Plus, it's not like I'm staking my life on their capture. They're golems, so they're not very dangerous. So just relax and wait here. Shin Woo said, and with his other hand, softly stroked Jin's back. Jin was shocked and his body shook. Guick, hey, don't make such strange noises. You're good now, right? He wasn't being crabby for no reason. With his soft hand movement, Shin Woo had activated his disguise skill on Jin as well. His armor was covered in ice, and Shin Woo and Jin, as a matching set, looked like an ice spirit. Still, you should have told me something. Oh, my bad. Jin had been indifferent until now as he realized that patience and introspection were pointless with Shin Woo. Shin Woo reacted a lot stronger than he thought he would, which confirmed that he did indeed realize that he was in the wrong. When working as a team members will often not need to speak their mind and will move without being told, as they trust their teammate. Though they faced life and death together, that may have been too much to ask for from Jin. In the future, I'll tell you beforehand. You see, I only recently thought about the fact that I could use disguise on you as well. That's not the problem here. Whatever. Seeing that, Kraisha chuckled, but when her eyes met with Jin's blazing goblin fire, she closed her mouth shut. Jin thought about giving Kraisha a good kick when he got back, and changed his back feet into springs. Now he could change them into springs in the blink of an eye. Then, I'm going. Hey, you're too fast. Shin Woo and Jin were soon able to see the golems that were moving slowly from afar. Even in the cloudy weather, their bodies shined, and they possessed an overwhelming magic. They were unmistakably level 6 golems. He gazed at their bodies, shining in silver, but even if he didn't see them, he would be able to figure out what they were. LV6 Silver Golem. As I thought, is it okay if we just leave them be until the cuckoo infects them all? If we wait for that, then they'll find the mine. The lower the magic, or the weaker they are, the more effective Mana Parasite is. So, we have to suck out their magic. And they ran towards them, unintentionally going at an outrageously fast speed. Encountering unknown enemy, intercepting, preparing magic, long-distance attacks are impossible, the enemy is approaching. The golems noticed them, and each raised their weapons and magic, but before they could even attack, they were struck by a whip and stopped moving. Shin Woo continuously attacked with his whip, which was clad in ice energy in order to quickly lower their magic resistance. Status ailment. Attempting to remove it by infusing mana. Failed. Trying again. Judged as an intermediate status ailment. It is only minor damage, but it will take a long time to recover from the status ailment. Self-recovery is impossible. Yeah, just keeping talking. The bifurcated spine whip emitted a horrifying sound and stretched out. It was as if two snakes were moving through the air and had found their prey. Hup! In an instance, Shin Woo snapped the whip and swung it. It bent flexibly, and in a short time, battered the golems dozens, if not hundreds of times, causing ice flowers to instantaneously spread on the 20 golems. Situation critical. Impossible to continue mission. Reporting to superiors. Cannot connect. The reason they couldn't connect was because Rem had infiltrated into their ranks and disabled their reporting program while Shin Woo and Jin were fighting them. If they prioritized disabling their means of communication, then Shin Woo would be able to take his time. Going through their command system was next. Nice. Then, shall we finish this up quickly? At last, Shin Woo summoned another whip and gripped it in his free hand. He turned all of his magic into ice energy and began whirling around his two whips. Jin could feel that and requested, "Let me assimilate that." So, the ice? Yeah. Wait, why? I got it. Shin Woo constantly swung his two whips and the golems, which were slowly approaching from all sides, were slowed. On the other hand, he shared his mana with Jin. He could do it easily if he were to just apply a portion of the lightning sprint's mana pattern. Hew up. Then, Jin used that ice as a medium and gathered mana in his mouth. Shin Woo felt the instantaneously amplified mana and his goblin fire swayed. Breath, hup, a thick cylindrical cannon came out of Jin's mouth. No, that's what it looked like at first, but soon, it curved outwards. It looked like a trumpet, and the large quantity of ice within. Pawak, the mana was discharged through the trumpet-shaped cannon, spreading everywhere. The 20 golems were well within the attack's range, and were instantly frozen solid. How is it? It wasn't just a simple, magic breath. He could create a varied cannon to adjust the attack to match the situation. This was Jin's first combined skill. Shin Woo automatically clapped at the boasting Jin and said, "If you had just told me about it from the get-go, I wouldn't have had to rush in." Shut up. Shin Woo really couldn't understand Jin, so Jin acted like it was a rodeo and shook his body. Then, Rem finished with his mana parasite. By attempting to resist the ice, they had completely used up all of their mana, so Rem could use his mana parasite without any resistance whatsoever. "Awaiting your orders, master. Please command me." Seeing the 20 level 6 golems that had become his subordinates, Shin Woo realized that he was just one step away from actually creating golems. Stake Steelworker won't come here himself. He has commanded us to make use of all our abilities and collect as many emeralds as possible. Silver, like gold, was an ore renowned for its ability to absorb mana. But the way it was used was a bit different. For example, gold was more geared for offensive magic, while silver was used for more practical magic. So the magic that these silver golems focused on was subspace. They were trying to clear out the entire mine with just these guys. It's a lower rank subspace than the one I have. It seems to be the limits of the material. Rem added. That's right. The subspace that these silver golems possessed was larger than Rem's own, but in exchange they were much larger. In terms of efficiency, Rem's was much better. It wasn't a difference that resulted from pure technical skill. The material that Rem was made of was an incredibly rare metal. It pissed Shin Woo off, but it would be difficult for him to acquire it right now. In any case, we've gained moving storehouses because of them. These guys were elites that were probably sent after much deliberation. Kraisha recollected Jin's ice breath and smiled bitterly. Of course, she could always do something similar if she used the same type of magic, but it would be difficult for her to gather all the mana in the surrounding area, change it into an element, and shoot it straight forward. It's a combination skill. Impressive. It's not like that, you know. Whilst Kraisha had fun teasing the embarrassed Jin, Shin Woo acquired all the information he could from the golems, nodded his head, and returned. Of course, he had sent them to the mine so that they would help his other subordinates mine for emeralds. They definitely have no idea that I've cleared out the secret facility. And they probably wouldn't expect me to have stolen these silver golems as well. How arrogant. That was their overconfidence in the steelworker seal. So long as they remained confident in it, Shin Woo would always have an absolute advantage over them. However, I can't be complacent. Of course you can't. If the silver golems don't return for some time, then their superiors might take action, so we have to clear out the mines as soon as possible and leave. However, you're thinking of something bad, aren't you? Jin pointed out sharply like a drake's canine, and Shin Woo flinched. I was just thinking, when the steelworkers send golems to a certain area, and we know where they're sending them, then we could get there before them and acquire more golems like this. You really are a demon. If you figure out their departure point, then it will be easy to ascertain their destination. Since it is possible for me to sense a golem's mana pattern. Then, Rem intervened. Shin Woo had known about Rem's detection abilities ever since Rem, a level 6 golem, had noticed the golems approaching before even Kraisha, a level 7 magician, but it really was amazing. From what he heard, it was a secondary ability that was a part of Rem's mana parasite skill. Shin Woo just naturally nodded his head. But understanding and astonishment were two different things. Shin Woo, what kind of monster did you make? My secretary did everything. I know nothing. Kraisha, who had been snickering at Shin Woo's deceit, like always, Jin just remained speechless, suddenly thought of something and nodded her head. Her eyes shined clearly like ice. If we do well, we may be able to grasp all of the golem's movements. You say some amazing things like it's nothing, you know that? There was an item that could make that possible. If Rem is able to use that, Li Shin Woo made a look with his goblin fire at Kraisha and seemed to ask, "What item? And where is it?" And Kraisha replied vigorously, "The Royal Magician Leader's training facility. It seems like they left the main area, but there were magic traps set up everywhere, so it was a great place to train my magical ability." It seemed like Kraisha had reached level 7 in a short period of time, not because she thoughtlessly hunted monsters, of course, she probably did her fair share of that, but because of her experiences in the training facility after following the traces of the Royal Magician Leader. Li Shin Woo remembered her explaining that she had found a lead on one of the 12 generals and nodded his head. There was definitely something like that. It's still there. It hasn't been broken through yet, so I'll go with you, Shin Woo. Huh? The artifact is there. Let's go together. Oh, I'm not a magician though. It'll help you train your other abilities too. Her explanation just made him feel more anxious, but it didn't seem like a lie. It seemed like she had wanted to drag him over there right after she helped him take down Hansen, but because he had so much work with the golems and whatnot, she had pushed it back. It seemed like Li Shin Woo didn't have the right to refuse. "Alright, then I suppose we can go together." Who? Kraisha's sigh of relief confirmed that she was still hiding something. However, Li Shin Woo decided not to question her and turned around. He wanted to go through the hardship of getting involved with a general too. There was no reason to doubt her, considering the fact that had grown to level 7. But right now, we have to make sure the group is safe. One of the 12 general's troops might be nearby. Why would his seniors, who were at least level 6, die? Because they were met with unforeseen danger. Even a level 7 couldn't relax in a level 3 danger zone, as it was filled with dangerous elements. A hero shouldn't put their focus into battle, they should be focused on their survival. "Oh, I found a dungeon." "Where?" "It's hidden over there, on the edge of the rock cliff with the raging wind." Of course, that was somewhat meaningless to his party. In the past, he was much weaker than the other heroes, so he had to tread with caution, but now that he'd gained so many abilities and had so many lives, he moved calmly and boldly without being impatient. Therefore, there were many cases like right now where you would find a hidden dungeon. Ah, there really is one. It's hidden by the naturally formed wind magic. The fact that you can keep thinking of Shin Woo as a rival makes me jealous. Let's first mark that on our minimap. Let's go over here next. They had discovered a dungeon, but they didn't enter it immediately, since they were still in the middle of reconnaissance. Their first priority? Looking for anything that might approach the mines and endanger their operations. For the next 2 hours, they scoured the entire area. Ultimately, they faced a few large level 6 and level 7 undead. Guwu, TCH, you're too loud. Be captivated by the Winter Queen's hands. Kawak, they weren't elite monsters, but when they get to around level 7, they become huge. Even though they weren't giants, most of them were at least several meters tall. But Li Shin Woo and Kraisha struck a balance between close range and long range, so the monsters weren't strong enough to be a threat. While Kraisha was casting a debuff, Li Shin Woo approached and cut the monster into pieces with a few powerful strikes. You have acquired 74,150 perium. You have acquired the LV7 Venomous Steel Snake's Fang. You have acquired the LV7 Venomous Steel Snake's Legbone. It's just a normal mob, but it's still a level 7, so what's with this perium? Perium doesn't increase with level. This guy was really weak. That was definitely true. Li Shin Woo complained and absorbed the Fang while he gave the Legbone to Jin. Though it was level 7, his strength only increased by 2, and his health and agility by 1. Jin was quite happy, so he must have increased his stats much more. My strength only increased by 1, but in exchange, my agility increased by 6. Yeah, you must love that child of light skill. No matter how he thought about it, Jin possessed an imbalanced skill. Li Shin Woo complained like crazy and collected the perium. Let's go to the dungeon now. Shino Rendu told me that it would take about 2 more days to completely clear out the mine, so let's go clear the dungeon and then. Huh? Shin Woo, what's wrong? He knew roughly how to get to the dungeon from where they were. He closed his eyes, called the minimap, and spoke in a doubtful voice. Jin tilted his head and asked what was wrong while Kraisha waited for him to continue. There's a group of our undead seniors moving together. Can't you just call them undead heroes? There are about 7 or 8 of them moving together in a group. That means that, are they working together? Does that mean these undead heroes, who, like Shino Rendu, retained their sense of identity, had created their own clan? Kracia thought that it was cool in its own way, and Shin Woo retorted. It'd be great if that were the case, but if we were to logically consider it, the chances of that are low. Why was it? At that moment, Shin Woo recalled Ethan Cruz, who had treated him kindly. What was he trying to do by approaching promising heroes? And what was his ability that had to do with darkness and curses? To be honest, he had guessed early on. But he just didn't have confirmation. Let's go back to the mine. Kracia, is it possible to hide the entire mine? Erasing our presences and making us look like a mountain is plenty. I'll need your help, but I can manage. Alright, then let's go right now. They were still quite far away, but they would pass by the mine in a day. They hurried and returned to the mine, and as Shin Woo had requested, Kracia cast a large-scale magical formula on top of the mine to disguise it. It was a spell that not only used Shin Woo and Jin's mana, but also Shino Rendu and the rest of the golems, and created a huge barrier that hid the existence of the mine. Then, exactly 16 hours after they had returned, so long as the enemy doesn't intend to attack first, I can make it so no traces of magic leak out. As expected of a magician. It's a relief that Kracia isn't our enemy, Shin Woo thought and smiled bitterly. Even though the royal magician leader had turned into an undead, he would probably wield extraordinary magic, so if he were to fight him, Shin Woo decided that he would make sure that Kracia was in his party. How is it? Are they coming this way? Fortunately, their objective wasn't the mine. After Shin Woo had told the Pauls to continue with their work, he looked outside. Though they were physically quite far away, he was level 6. If he were to use his magic to improve his vision, he would be able to see several kilometers away. How many hours did he wait like that? He was finally able to observe the group of undead heroes moving. Jin and Kracia watched from beside him and had their own respective reactions. Shin Woo could understand what they were feeling. At the same time, he was sure that his assumption was correct. There's a living person in the middle of them. Shush, Paul 0, that means. You're right. To be exact, there were 8 high-rank undead gathered together, and the man, riding atop a spectral horse, was a cool-looking, middle-aged man with black, curly hair and purple eyes that seemed to suit him. They felt life energy linger around his cheeks, but they could recognize the black energy that wrapped around the rest of his body even several kilometers away. The dreary and deep energy that would make one shudder felt like a concentrated version of the Empire's curse. Ethan Cruz. The words just naturally came out of his mouth, as he confirmed his identity. He's a necromancer. A necromancer. A magician who raises the dead and controls their bodies. And because the Empire was teeming with the undead, one could say that an individual who could control them was a necromancer as well. Shin Woo had his suspicions early on, but it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that he himself was also a necromancer. But the way in which he controlled them differed. Rather than using magic, he used a variety of innate skills to control them. But it doesn't feel like he found those undead heroes through luck. Are you saying that he deliberately killed heroes so that he could make them his subordinates? Maybe. If not, then he couldn't explain why Ethan Cruz had directed him to a special area. He wanted to help him level up quickly? Probably, since he didn't want weak undead. Then can you really call him a hero? I wonder. At the very least, God considers him a hero. For now, disgusting. So much so that it makes what you've done thus far look cute. Why are you getting me involved? They remained on guard and maintained the barrier until they could hide thoroughly from Ethan Cruz and his group of undead heroes. When they were about an hour away with Jin's running speed, they let go of the barrier. They had noticed their opponent's advance beforehand, and had completely avoided them, but, even so, Shin Woo couldn't hide his bitterness. As I thought, I'm still too weak. No matter how many skeletons had become his subordinates, or the fact that he could now manufacture golems, he still had to put in this much effort just to avoid one person. Even if he took into account that Ethan Cruz was special, it was still quite frustrating. But this'll be the last time. It won't be long before I come for you. Shin Woo had discovered Ethan, while Ethan still knew nothing about Shin Woo. This would become a deciding factor in their fight later. Shin Woo was sure of it. In the close future, Ethan Cruz would stand upon his stage. If that happened, he would pay him back for treating him like a chess piece. It seems like their goal is, ah, it's where you died. Me? They had been so busy maintaining the barrier until now, and Shino Rendu, who was on standby beside them, replied in a truly bitter voice. Until his death, he had respected and followed Ethan Cruz, so Lee Shin Woo could understand how he felt. Yeah, it seems like he just figured out where you died and came here. Then that means that there's someone who's following his orders and scouting around for him. If he got the chance, he would catch and extract some information from the scout. Lee Shin Woo nodded his head and Shino Rendu was still unable to accept reality, wrapping his large fists around his head. Why would a hero not care about following God's command? It must be more entertaining that way for him. He's strange. He looks like he'd be able to easily defeat 1 or 2 generals. The undead he brought along with him were at least level 6. There were a few level 7s mixed in as well, and Ethan Cruz's own magic was quite extraordinary. If that's the case, then he should be able to defeat generals like Hansen. Then why wasn't he doing that? Moreover, why does he only use undead heroes? Does his necromancy only work on other heroes? It's likely. Though darkness mana is the power to link the living and the dead together, I've heard that if the previous relation is of enemies, then the link won't work well. However, just by them previously being heroes, their karma is quite similar. It makes sense that the darkness element would work then. Kracia, who would talk at length whenever the subject was on magic, explained and Lee Shin Woo acknowledged her. If that's the case, then it made sense why Ethan Cruz wasn't actively hunting the 12 generals. He would continuously wander the empire, waiting for the heroes to die so that he could make them his subordinates. There was no need for him to hurry and attempt to kill the 12 generals. Rather, they were a precious fighting force that would kill heroes for him. Are you saying that they're the reason that I died and became an undead? Yeah, in any case, he's still a hero, no matter what anyone says, and he's fighting against the Emperor, so when he thinks that his army is ready, he'll fight against the Emperor. If you look at it that way, you could say that he's definitely an outstanding hero. Everything else about him disgusts me, so I can't help but laugh. The goblin fire within Shino Rendu's eye sockets blazed intensely. He was a special species of undead that fed off feelings of vengeance. With just their conversation about Ethan Cruz, Lee Shin Woo was sure that the next time they met, Shino Rendu would be stronger than before. However, if Lee Shin Woo were in Ethan Cruz's shoes, he might have done the same thing as him, so he couldn't say anything more. If there was a more effective way to get stronger, then it was obvious that one would take that approach. But then, Shino Rendu added something surprising. It's such a relief that I became your subordinate, rather than his. What, Paul Zero, you accept us as we are. You didn't lead us. You gave us the will to go where we want to go ourselves. Huh? What the hell is he talking about? He'd only said that to them so he could better control them. While Lee Shin Woo was taken aback, Kracia chipped in from beside him. You can tell by just looking at the quality of Paul Zero's mana. She was talking about Lee Shin Woo's darkness element. Indeed, Lee Shin Woo was capable of forming contracts with regular undead heroes, golems, or even humans like Kracia through the darkness element, which was definitely different from Ethan Cruz's application. Just by looking at another darkness element user like Ethan Cruz, one would be able to tell that that wasn't normal. I feel like your karma's affecting it too, since the way in which magic of a similar element is used depends on the individual. Yeah, you could be right. It seemed like the Joker karma was outside the norm in many ways. But it was ultimately because of his Joker karma, not his consideration for others, that caused people to follow him. However, it would look bad if he were to correct Shino Rendu's misunderstanding by explaining his wickedness, so he just kept his mouth shut. This seemed like something he had thought about just a little while ago. Then, get back to work. We'll return to our base once we've completely cleared out the mine. I understand. The golems immediately returned to mining. At longest, it should take about another day for them to completely empty the mine. With so many raw materials, he should be able to create golems with the cores he had and still have a lot of materials left over. Then I have to go to Plain to sell my wine. Though I wonder how many cores you can make with the money you get from selling the wine. I should be able to make a lot. Kracia spoke, not knowing just how much the Kerr Century Winery's wine had increased in value, and Lee Shin Woo replied with a grin. Then, he took his party to the dungeon that they had found 2 days ago and cleared it. Level 6 Dungeon. You have acquired a permit to enter the Eagle's Cliff. All stats are increased by 20 within the dungeon. The dungeon's information will be added to your minimap. All actions will be buffed within the dungeon. Surprisingly, it was a level 6 dungeon with large, flying monsters. However, by keeping in step with Jin, who turned his hooves into springs, and fiercely swinging his whip around, they were able to safely clear the dungeon. They couldn't forget about Kracia, who cast a large-scale debuff on their enemies, which slowed down all of their movements. Executing bone reinforcement on Jin Taylor by consuming the LV6 Shadow Cliff Eagle's wingbone. A considerable amount of the effect is shared. Agility has increased by 2, and magic by 1. Kyuru, Kiyu, King of Eagle's Cliff. How is it? Does it feel like you'll grow wings? Nope. TCH. As I thought, it had to be a level 7 elite for that. Nope. Anything between 3,200 and 6,400 stats constituted level 6. In a level 6 dungeon, the dungeon boss would possess stats much greater than the ordinary monsters, yet they would often not reach level 7 and would still be level 6. So it made sense that bone reinforcement's effects were getting weaker. But contrary to Shin Woo, who was disappointed that Jin didn't sprout wings, Jin looked at him with frigid eyes. It seemed only Kracia was allocated a reward that she actually wanted. Then let's go back. It seems like the golems are finished mining. How much did your stats go up, Shin Woo? If I include the stat gains from my ice element and my intermediate elements, my stats increased by 50. You really are a cheater. Shin Woo thought that they might encounter troops under a general's command, or another hero on the way back to their hideout, but fortunately, that didn't happen. Instead, on the way back there was one topic of interest in the chatting channel. Lloyd HK. It feels like the high-rank undead are on the move more. Prince Altania. TCH, why now? Lloyd, do we need to group up? Lloyd HK. I'm fine, since I'm with Arian right now. I'm actually worried about you. Mentes Oren. Those bastards periodically make a huge fuss, so don't be so worried. The Emperor probably ordered the 12 generals to go on a large-scale patrol. Yi Jin Jin. Danger level 2 zones should be fine, right? Mr. Shin Woo, are you okay? Shin Woo. No problem as of yet. Shin Woo replied as he sweated profusely. It seemed like they hadn't noticed his unease and went on with their conversation. Ethan Cruz. Even so, their movements are a bit excessive. Would I be overreacting if I were to say I feel like they're going to war? Mentes Oren. War. Who's fighting who? Ethan Cruz. I wonder. I don't know that much. However, you know that there are several groups that move independently aside from us. Lloyd HK. The 12 generals' agents are already too much for us, but you're saying that there are other groups out there. Prince Altania. Heng. Lloyd, wait a bit. I'll come over after I get to level 7. Lloyd HK. Yeah, you're really reliable. I trust you. Sarah von Redidane. Everyone, please keep yourselves hidden and do not make any large movements. It isn't the right time yet. Prince Altania. You be careful too, Sarah. Though I have no idea where you are. Sarah von Redidane. Please call me Redidane. Shin Woo couldn't take it anymore and exited the chatting channel. Including the questions he wanted to ask Sarah, which made his mouth itch, there were many things on his mind right now. It was too clear that Shin Woo was the cause of this war that Ethan Cruz was talking about. Was his misinformation making the Emperor uneasy right now? For the time being, we shouldn't go to the Golem main base. I really like your way of causing trouble for others and then getting out of the situation by yourself. It seemed like his misinformation regarding the secret facility that both the Emperor and the Golems wanted was in full swing, and causing chaos within the Empire. The reason Shin Woo hadn't known about any of it was because he had been concentrating on making wine and golems. In any case, let's think positively. They can't just ignore Anti-Skull anymore. How can you be so evil? Shin Woo led his party, including his recently acquired silver golems, and safely returned to his base without anyone knowing. Regardless of whether or not the Empire's undead found the golems or Anti-Skull and caused chaos, Shin Woo wouldn't get himself involved. Dark Elemental Bone. A bone gem with all the unnecessary elements removed, and contains the essence of pure darkness mana. It is a never-before-seen treasure that can contain a much larger quantity of magic than its appearance might suggest. Nice. A lot more was removed than I expected, but now I'm done processing the raw materials. The cores are ready too. Shin Woo and Kraisha had spent a few days after returning to base processing the materials, and would finally be able to start producing golems. Looking back on it, it seemed like it had taken so long to get to this point, but it had actually taken less than a month. He hadn't been able to hunt much, but there had been so much to do, going from here to there, so it was obvious that it felt like it had been so long. Pauls, you did well. Form your groups and go out hunting again. And don't forget to report if you find a mine. Whenever you call us, we will come. Shino Rendu, who had become more dependable than when he was human, said his goodbyes and left with the Pauls. Almost 1,000 troops had left in an instant, so it looked like the base was completely empty, but there were still hundreds of golems left. You guys go too. You know what to do if you meet a steelworker, right? Only you are our master. He said his farewells to the golems which had their minds tampered with by Rem. He left behind 10 golems in order to manage the winery and produce the wine. As they continue to do their job, they'll make big and small mistakes, and eventually become specialists in making wine. The silver golems were on standby for now. Paul Zero, you're not done yet? Now's the important part, so just keep watch. Then I'll come by to play when you're finished. The Dryads, who didn't know that Shin Woo was leaving the winery as soon as he was finished, returned to the vineyard. Shin Woo and Kraisha then began to produce golems in earnest. They called it making golems, but they already had everything mapped out, so all they had to do was follow the plans in order and make the golems. Normally, just inserting the raw materials and the core in separate facilities was enough to manufacture a golem, but he needed to try doing it once manually. There's a partial flaw. Kraisha, wait a sec. As I thought, it was a problem with the knee joint. I'll fix it right away. Wait just a sec. No, let's get rid of this and instead, use the magic in the raw materials to fuse it. During the manufacturing process, the two engaged in a conversation that Jin couldn't understand once more. However, he decided that he wouldn't leave this time, since he wanted to at least be there when Shin Woo created his first golem. Fortunately, the errors in their plans weren't too big, so they could progress without much issue. There used to only be a core at the center of the work table, but in no time, there was a body attached to it, and then limbs as well, which was quite the spectacle. Done. The legs are moving, but is the core's AI okay like this? You don't need to imprint anything else? We have the darkness mana. Look, perhaps because the dark elemental bone's very birth was affected by Shin Woo, it naturally absorbed Shin Woo's darkness magic. It looked as though the golem would be fully loyal to Shin Woo before it was even finished. Kraisha just sulked a little bit. But I'm making it with you too. Then come back after you've learned how to use darkness magic. From the very beginning, Kraisha had been interested in manufacturing golems, not taking ownership of them. Honestly, in the process of studying the magic applied to golems, she had increased her knowledge of magic theory beyond her imagination, so she did achieve her objective, but it feels weird. It's like the feeling a mother has when her baby, that was born through a joint effort between parents, only follows the father around, rather than the mother. Did you have a kid in your original world? No, I didn't. I'm talking about our kid, ours. The process went smoothly. It felt like it wouldn't go this smoothly when Arama Steelworker made golems. The speed at which the golem's magic, which had fused with the darkness magic, circulated incredibly fast, and the connection between the core and its body was quite solid. It'd probably be hard to use the magic in a different way. It doesn't have that ability, and it wouldn't be efficient. Since these are weapons for combat. Then, I think it's done. Shin Woo, the assembly's done. They'd only started building the golem less than an hour ago, yet there was a 4-meter-tall humanoid golem laying atop the work table. Though it was a similar height to the level 5 iron golem, its abilities were incomparable. At least in terms of design. Will it really move? It'll definitely move. I'm more worried about whether this thing is a level 6 or not. We used a level 6 core, so it should be. The raw materials in the process were perfect, so it could be an elite as well. He couldn't help but shake. Shin Woo had only focused on a singular goal: creating a golem. However, if they actually succeeded in creating a golem, then their status would change in an instant. That's because he would be able to control hundreds of level 6 elite golems, entities that made even the other heroes nervous. Shin Woo softly closed and opened his eyes. His heart was pounding, and he wanted to sigh, yet he couldn't as he didn't have any respiratory organs. Not having any means of breathing never hurt so much. Shin Woo, try activating it. All right, I'm doing it. In the end, he steeled himself and placed his hand atop the core. Of course, the core was protected by an especially durable material, but if Shin Woo were to just let out his magic, it would reach the core immediately. That's how impressive the mana conductivity of the material was. Activate. He unconsciously spoke a word that was strictly unnecessary, and emitted darkness magic from his fingertips. A skeleton and a golem. Normally, these two entities couldn't easily be linked, but the darkness magic made it almost too natural. Activating. His powerful will was transmitted along with his magic, and the core seemed to prioritize its absorption. The core, which emitted a gentle light, vibrated like a heart suddenly pounding, and emitted darkness magic everywhere, filling each and every part of the golem's body. Checking to see if all parts can be activated. There was an operating organ located within its brain, and its arms could attack in a variety of ways with magic, while its feet had boosters that could increase its speed through magic. Once that process was complete, a gentle green light radiated from the dark green, translucent golem. Despite being an inanimate object, it seemed to give off vigor that it didn't have before. Activating. The golem spoke in a mechanical voice, and simultaneously, the golem's body bizarrely wriggled. This was the process of the core regulating all of the body's magic. And eventually, it slowly, very slowly stood up. Recognizing situation, the golem turned its head slowly and looked around. Because its upper body was 2 meters by itself, it had to look down to see Shin Woo and Kracia. It was so overwhelming that Kracia instinctively grabbed her orb, and Shin Woo kept Rem on standby. However, that was honestly quite pointless. The moment it had turned its head and seen Shin Woo, it felt like the darkness magic he had released formed a deep link between them, and the golem spoke thusly. Master has been recognized. The moment Shin Woo heard that, it felt as though the tension had left his body. Kracia staggered and even fell towards Shin Woo, but fortunately, Jin caught her. And who am I? Shin Woo tried his very best to not act excited and asked. The golem's response came immediately. You are my master. Master, please give me a name so you can differentiate me from the others. Shin Woo clenched his fists. Kracia just remained vacant and was just waiting for him. In a calm voice, Shin Woo gave him a name. Rem 2, no, let's go with Aram. Recognized. Regardless of whether it was Rem 2 or Aram, his naming sense didn't involve an S. However, Aram happily accepted its name. But was it normal to give golems a name? He thought and tilted his head. Then, a message appeared before Shin Woo. You have created the elite LV6 Dark Emerald Bone Golem, Aram. You have succeeded in creating a unique golem by stealing techniques from various places. These Dark Emerald Bone Golems, which were created with darkness magic as their foundation, not only possess high strength and can emit powerful magic, but have a high elemental resistance as well. But their greatest strength is their ability to draw in this world's darkness magic and store it in their bodies. Through that, there is a chance that they can become even stronger. One problem with these golems, however, is that they have no value as commercial products. They will be absolutely loyal to you, as you possess darkness magic. You have acquired the title, Puppet Master. All stats have increased by 5. The command skill's effect is increased, and the power of the darkness element increases slightly. He had somewhat expected this to happen. How could he not get a title when he had just created a golem? However, something that he hadn't expected was added on. Your strength stat has surpassed 1000. You have acquired the title, He Who Dreams of Giants. Strength has increased by 10. Your body is evolving so that you can exhibit greater strength. It seems as though the 5 stat bonus from Puppet Master had caused his strength to surpass 1000 and got him a new title. When his magic had surpassed 1000, his body had changed as well, so it was happening this time too. Shin Woo? Wait just a sec. Although it was a title related to his future growth, his body didn't change dramatically, but his body had certainly gotten stronger so that he could exhibit more of his strength. The feeling of his body being heavier and sharper wasn't bad. He was wearing armor, so one couldn't see what was underneath, but Shin Woo could feel the changes. But Kraisha told me that you would only get a title like this once. He remembered clearly. At the time, she said that the first stat, strength, agility, health, or magic, to surpass 1000 would come with a title, and that title would determine their level 5 job and the direction of their growth. Therefore, he looked back at Kraisha, but it looked like she had no idea what was going on. In the end, he decided not to say anything and move on. This is probably due to the Joker karma. Well, I just got a title from making the golem. Did you get it too? Shin Woo feigned ignorance and asked. Kraisha tilted her head and obediently answered. Yeah, one who walks the path of new magic. Nice. I'm sure we succeeded, so shall we finish making all of the golems? From Aram to Aram 277. So you really are going through with that name. They had succeeded in making the prototype, so there was no reason to hesitate anymore. Shin Woo and Kraisha activated the manufacturing equipment that had been standing by, meticulously scanned Aram, set the fine controls on the equipment, and added the materials. The initial activation will require my mana, so it's still a problem that I have to put my hand atop each and every one of them. Shin Woo, I'm activating it. Yeah, go ahead, Roger. Kraisha's eyes shined and activated the manufacturing process for all the equipment. The dark emerald bones and the cores that were piled together like a mountain were placed into the devices one by one, radiated a blinding light here and there, and began the fusion to form the golems. Shin Woo was anticipating the moment that Aram 2 was finished and gathered his darkness mana. Unfortunately, no one knew that Shin Woo was making an army that could threaten a part of the empire.